Have you ever walked through a museum and felt like you were being watched? That sensation that the eyes of history are upon you, holding secrets just out of reach. It's not just your imagination. What if I told you that some of the world's most famous artifacts aren't merely relics of a bygone era, they're time capsules waiting to be cracked open, whispering messages across centuries? These aren't simple scratches or random patterns. They're deliberate, concealed communications left behind by people whose voices we thought were long silenced. For generations, historians and archaeologists have carefully studied ancient objects, believing they understood their purpose and meaning. But what happens when we look closer, when we shine a new light, apply modern technology, or simply ask a different question? Suddenly, a seemingly ordinary sword inscription reveals a coded battle cry. A painted landscape hides a star map, or a religious icon contains a political warning meant only for the eyes of the initiated. These aren't mistakes or coincidences. They are hidden messages crafted with intention, buried by time, and now emerging to rewrite the stories we thought we knew. Today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover 30 of these astonishing discoveries. From encrypted symbols on Egyptian tombs to overlooked details in Renaissance masterpieces, we'll explore how art, faith, power, and rebellion were encoded into objects meant to outlast their creators. You'll see history not as a static record, but as a living, breathing puzzle, one that invites us to lean in, question everything, and listen for the echoes of those who came before us. This is about more than solving mysteries. It's about rediscovering our connection to the past in a deeper, more intimate way. So let's begin. Our journey begins not in a dusty tomb or a grand palace, but at the bottom of the sea. In the year 1901, sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera made a stunning discovery: the wreck of a Roman-era cargo ship. Among the statues and treasures recovered was a lump of corroded bronze and wood, so encrusted and unassuming that it was almost overlooked. For decades, it sat in a museum in Athens, a perplexing curiosity. Little did anyone know they had recovered the world's first known analog computer, a device so sophisticated its secrets would take over a century to fully unravel. This is the Antikythera Mechanism. X-ray and later 3D imaging technology finally allowed scientists to peer inside the corroded shell, revealing an intricate clockwork of at least 30 precise bronze gears, all meticulously hand-cut and arranged within a wooden frame. It was a complex machine dedicated to modeling the cosmos, but the true hidden messages weren't just in the gears themselves. They were etched onto the device's front and back plates in tiny, nearly invisible Greek letters. These inscriptions were the user's manual and the key to its purpose, a celestial code waiting to be cracked. The text, once deciphered, revealed the mechanism could predict the movement of the 5 known planets, the phases of the moon, and even the timing of lunar and solar eclipses. It was a portable planetarium, an astronomical calculator that could chart the heavens years into the future. One of the most profound hidden messages was a calendar for the ancient Panhellenic Games, including the Olympic Games, linking celestial cycles directly to the most important cultural events of the Greek world. This wasn't just a scientific instrument, it was a unification of science, religion, and society. The stunning implication is that this level of mechanical sophistication was not a one-off miracle. A device this advanced must have been based on a long tradition of astronomical engineering and mathematical knowledge, a tradition that was completely lost to history for over 1,000 years. The Antikythera Mechanism forces us to rewrite the history of technology. It whispers a message of incredible human ingenuity, a peak of scientific achievement that was tragically wiped away by the passage of time, only to deliver its message from the deep centuries later. Decoding the Antikythera Mechanism's inscriptions was like finally hearing the voice of its creator after 2 millennia of silence. It told us this wasn't merely a toy for the wealthy, it was a profound philosophical statement. The ancient Greeks believed the cosmos operated on orderly, mathematical principles, and this machine was the ultimate expression of that belief. By turning a hand crank, a user could witness the divine dance of the heavens play out on a dial, predicting eclipses and planetary movements with a precision that was nothing short of magical for its time. This was a tool for both science and spirituality, bridging the gap between human understanding and the mysteries of the universe. The sophistication of its gear trains, particularly the pin and slot device that perfectly models the moon's irregular orbit, points to a genius-level understanding of astronomy and mechanical engineering. This level of complexity has led many scholars to a tantalizing theory. The mechanism might be a product of the school of Archimedes, the legendary mathematician and inventor. While it was found on a Roman ship dating to around 60 or 70 BC, the design principles are so advanced that it may have been based on earlier work from Archimedes himself, who was killed in 212 BC. It's conceivable this device is a descendant of his brilliant mind, a physical manifestation of knowledge that was otherwise lost to us. Its cultural impact would have been immense. For ancient navigators, the ability to predict lunar phases and weather patterns could mean the difference between a successful trading voyage and a disastrous one. For priests and politicians, accurately forecasting an eclipse, an event often seen as a terrifying omen, could be a powerful tool to maintain social order or demonstrate divine favor. The device's built-in calendar for the Panhellenic Games also shows how it unified the Greek world, synchronizing religious festivals and athletic competitions across city-states through a shared celestial clock. It was a tool that connected the practical, the political, and the sacred. Modern reconstructions, both physical and digital, bring this ancient marvel back to life, allowing us to see its bronze gears turn and its dials spin. These models confirm the incredible accuracy of its predictions and the breathtaking ingenuity of its design. The true legacy of the Antikythera Mechanism is the profound way it reshapes our view of the ancient world. It forces us to abandon the simplistic notion of linear progress, where technology steadily advances. Instead, it reveals a history full of peaks and valleys, where brilliant cultures achieved astonishing heights only to have their knowledge swallowed by time, waiting for the right moment to send a message to the future. After a machine that mapped the heavens, we now turn to a book that seems to map a world that never was. If the Antikythera Mechanism is a testament to how much we can learn from ancient genius, the Voynich Manuscript is a humbling reminder of how much still remains hidden in plain sight. This is perhaps the most famous unsolved cipher in the world, a book that has stubbornly refused to give up its secrets for over 5 centuries. The manuscript first appears in the historical record in the court of Rudolf II, the Holy Roman Emperor, in the late 16th century. He was a monarch fascinated by the occult and the strange, and he reportedly purchased the book for 600 gold ducats, a small fortune. But its journey to his court is a mystery. Carbon dating has since confirmed the vellum pages were created between 1404 and 1438, likely in northern Italy. Its name comes from Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish book dealer who acquired it in 1912 and brought it to the world's attention. To call it merely strange would be an understatement. It is approximately 240 pages long, filled from edge to edge with a flowing, unknown script written from left to right. Not a single word of this script has ever been conclusively matched to any known language, alphabet, or cipher. The text is accompanied by illustrations that are equally bizarre and captivating. They are grouped into sections that scholars have labeled herbal, astronomical, biological, and pharmaceutical, but these are just our best guesses. The herbal section depicts plants unlike any known on Earth. They are fantastical hybrids with bizarre root systems and leaves that seem to defy botany. The astronomical section is filled with circular diagrams of medallions featuring naked women, strange castles, and zodiac symbols arranged in intricate, unfamiliar patterns. Then there is the most famous section, often called the biological foldouts. These show a complex plumbing system of pipes and vessels connecting groups of plump, naked women who are bathing together in green, communal pools. The overall impression is one of a scientific or medical text from a parallel universe. For over 100 years, the world's top cryptographers, linguists, and historians have tried to break its code. Some of the greatest minds from both world wars, including American and British codebreakers who cracked the infamous Enigma cipher, turned their skills to the Voynich and walked away utterly defeated. Their failure suggests this is no simple substitution cipher. The text displays a statistical complexity that mirrors natural language. Word entropy and letter patterns are consistent with real linguistic structures, making the theory that it's an elaborate hoax increasingly difficult to support. Theories about its meaning are as varied as they are creative. Some believe it was written in a constructed language, a philosophical code meant only for the initiated. Others propose it is a very rare dialect, now extinct, that was recorded phonetically with an invented alphabet. There is a theory that it is a glossolalia, a form of automatic writing channeled during a spiritual trance. And of course, the hoax theory persists, suggesting a clever forger like Edward Kelly, John Dee's associate, created it to swindle the gullible Emperor Rudolph out of his gold. The most recent and tantalizing analysis comes from the application of artificial intelligence. In 2018, a team of Canadian researchers used AI algorithms to analyze the manuscript's text patterns, suggesting it might be encoded Hebrew. Their algorithm proposed that the script was created with alphagrams, where letters of a word are reordered according to a fixed system. While this was a fascinating approach, follow-up work by native Hebrew speakers could not produce a coherent translation from the AI's starting point, and the mystery endured. Perhaps the true hidden message of the Voynich manuscript is not contained in its unreadable words but in its very existence. It is a permanent question mark, a monument to the limits of our knowledge. It reminds us that the past is not a puzzle we will ever completely solve. There are corners of history that remain dark, holding onto their secrets with a quiet defiance. This book is a siren's call to every curious mind, a promise that there are still profound mysteries waiting for the one who can finally hear its voice. Leaving behind the baffling pages of the Voynich manuscript, we travel further back in time to the Bronze Age and the magnificent Minoan palace of Phaistos on the island of Crete. It was here in 1908, during excavations of a basement chamber in the ancient complex, that Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernia made a discovery that would become just as enigmatic. Buried in the ashes of a destroyed building, he found a small, fired clay disc about 6 inches in diameter. Unlike anything else ever uncovered from the Minoan world, it was immediately extraordinary. Both of its faces were covered with a series of fascinating pictographic symbols, all arranged in a precise spiral pattern that curled from the outer edge inward toward the center. This is the Phaistos Disc, and its message has been completely silent for over 3,000 years. What makes the disc so utterly unique and so maddening to decipher is its production method. These aren't symbols that were carved or painted onto the clay. Each one was stamped into the soft clay using a separate, individually crafted seal, making this object the earliest known example of movable type printing in human history. This single fact elevates it from a curious artifact to a revolutionary one. Someone, in the 2nd millennium BC, went to the immense trouble of creating a full set of typeface seals, each with its own detailed symbol, to carefully impress this specific sequence of signs. This was not a casual note, it was a deliberate, important document. The level of intention behind its creation screams that its content was significant, making our inability to read it all the more frustrating. The script itself is comprised of 45 distinct signs. These are tiny, elegant pictures showing familiar figures like a walking man, a tattooed human head, a ship, a helmet, a shield, an arrow, and various plants and animals. These symbols are grouped into what appear to be words, separated by incised vertical lines, with a total of 241 impressions forming 61 word groups. The text seems to run from the outer rim toward the center on one side, and then continue from the center to the rim on the other, suggesting a continuous narrative. But what story does it tell? The theories are as numerous as they are creative, and none have achieved widespread acceptance. Some of the earliest attempts at decipherment proposed it was a document of great importance. One prominent theory suggests it is a religious text, perhaps a hymn to a Minoan mother goddess, with the repeating symbols representing a sacred chant or liturgy. Another posits that it is a legal document, maybe a list of land grants or a treaty between powerful figures. Given that it was found in a palace context, it could very well be an inventory of stored goods or a record of tributes paid to the king. The military imagery of shields and helmets has even led some to speculate it details a battle strategy or celebrates a great victory. Beyond the serious academic proposals, the disc's mystery has invited more imaginative interpretations. The spiral pattern and the pictorial nature of the symbols led one researcher to suggest it was not a text at all, but Chinese letter for an ancient board game, a precursor to something like the Egyptian game of Senet, where the symbols represent different spaces and challenges on the game board. Another far more speculative idea is that the disc is a form of ancient astronomical calendar, with the spiral representing the cyclical nature of time and the symbols correlating to celestial events or constellations. The fundamental problem that has stymied every single decipherment attempt is the disc's isolation. It is a hapax legomenon, an entire written language that appears only once. There are no other examples of this script anywhere in the world, no bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone to provide a key. Without more examples for comparison, any attempt to crack the code is essentially a shot in the dark. A would-be decipherer can assign sounds or meanings to the symbols in a way that creates a coherent message in, say, ancient Greek or Hittite or Luwian, but there is no way to prove that their chosen assignments are correct. It could just as easily be a language that is now completely lost and forgotten. This profound isolation is what secures the Phaistos Disc's place as one of archaeology's greatest and most enduring puzzles. It is a single, powerful voice from the sophisticated Minoan civilization, a culture we know primarily through its breathtaking art and architecture. We can see their vibrant frescoes and navigate their labyrinthine palaces, but we cannot hear their words. The disc is their one known attempt to send a printed message into the future, a message that we can physically hold in our hands but cannot mentally comprehend. It is a haunting reminder of how fragile knowledge can be and how advanced culture can vanish, leaving behind only the most tantalizing and cryptic of clues. Moving from the silent, printed mystery of the Phaistos Disc, we now journey to a scale so vast it can only be fully appreciated from the heavens themselves. High on the arid plains of southern Peru, an entire landscape was transformed into a canvas, etched with enormous figures and lines that have baffled observers for centuries. These are the Nazca lines, and their hidden messages weren't meant for human eyes at all. They were directed at the gods in the sky. The sheer immensity of these geoglyphs is almost impossible to grasp from the ground. Created by the Nazca people between 500 BC and 500 AD, the lines were made by simply removing the top layer of dark, sun-baked stones to reveal the lighter-colored sand beneath. This technique, while simple in concept, resulted in staggering complexity. There are straight lines that run for miles, perfectly geometric triangles and trapezoids, and colossal depictions of animals and plants, a hummingbird with a wingspan wider than a jumbo jet, a spider, a monkey with a spiraled tail, and a towering humanoid figure often called the astronaut. For a culture without the ability to fly, the creation of art that could only be seen in its entirety from great altitude is a profound mystery in itself. The most compelling theory about their purpose moves beyond mere art and into the realm of ancient cosmology. Many researchers believe these giant formations are a hidden message encoded in the landscape, a massive astronomical calendar aligned with the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars. The long, arrow straight lines don't point to random locations on the horizon. Several have been shown to align precisely with the point where the sun rises or sets during the solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year. Other lines track the movements of important stars and constellations, which were deeply woven into the Nazca people's mythology and their understanding of the changing seasons. This celestial connection suggests the geoglyphs were far more than simple markers. They were likely ritual pathways integral to ceremonies that united the community with the cosmos. Imagine hundreds of people walking along the outline of the giant hummingbird during a specific solar event, their procession a physical prayer for water and fertility in an incredibly dry environment. The lines themselves, by capturing the attention of celestial deities, may have been intended as a form of communication, a desperate and beautiful request for life-giving rain from the gods they believed controlled the heavens. This interpretation transforms the desert from a barren expanse into a sacred, interactive text. The hidden message of the Nazca lines is one of relationship, a dialogue between a fragile human society and the powerful, often unpredictable forces of nature they revered. They weren't leaving a message for future archaeologists. They were sending a continuous, monumental signal to the divine, embedding their deepest hopes and most critical celestial knowledge directly into the land they called home. Yet the mystery of the lines pales in comparison to an entirely different kind of message, one not carved into the earth but into wood on one of the most isolated islands on the planet. Far out in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, on Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, another civilization left behind a cryptic legacy that has proven just as impenetrable. Here, the hidden messages aren't giant figures for the gods, but delicate glyphs on wooden tablets, meant for human eyes that can no longer read them. This is the Rongorongo script, and its story is as tragic as it is fascinating. Unlike the ancient origins of the Phaistos Disc, the Rongorongo tablets emerged into the wider world under a cloud of colonial tragedy. The first recorded sighting of the script by outsiders came in the late 19th century when Catholic missionaries arrived on the island. They were horrified to discover that the native people they sought to convert possessed what appeared to be a form of writing. This was a direct challenge to their assumption that only Europeans held such advanced knowledge. In a devastating act of cultural suppression, the missionaries branded the tablets as pagan idolatry and pressured the Rapa Nui to destroy them and abandon the practice. Many were burned, and with them, the key to understanding this unique written language was nearly lost forever. What survives today are just 24 fragile wooden tablets, along with a handful of inscriptions on other objects like a chieftain's staff and a birdman figurine. The glyphs themselves are beautifully intricate and consistent, suggesting a fully developed writing system. They feature a variety of forms, humanoid figures in postures of dance or prayer, birds, fish, plants, and geometric patterns, all arranged in a unique method called reverse boustrophedon. This means the text reads from left to right on the first line, but then the tablet is rotated 180 degrees to read the next line, so the characters themselves are upside down relative to the line above. This sophisticated structure confirms it is true writing, not mere decoration. But what do these finely carved symbols say? The most widely accepted theory, based on the oral histories of the Rapa Nui people, is that the tablets are sacred chants. They likely contain the island's creation myths, genealogies tracing the lineage of powerful chiefs back to the gods, and rituals for important ceremonies like the Birdman competition. They were not meant to be read silently. They were memory aids for trained experts, priests, or elders who would recite the texts aloud during festivals. The tablet itself was a prompt, its glyphs triggering the memorized words of a vast oral tradition. The true message was in the spoken performance, not just the carved symbols. This connection to oral recitation is what makes the loss of the Rongorongo readers so profound. In the 1860s, the island was devastated by slave raids that abducted and killed nearly half the population, including most of the educated elites and elders who would have been the keepers of this knowledge. Then, introduced diseases further decimated the community. Within a single generation, the living chain of transmission was brutally severed. The few surviving islanders could sometimes name the glyphs, calling one a fish, another a bird, but the ability to string those symbols together into their original poetic and religious meaning was gone. The language was silenced. Modern attempts to decipher Rongorongo have followed every possible path. Some researchers have tried to link it to the ancient scripts of the Indus Valley or to a hypothetical writing system from a lost Pacific continent, though no evidence supports this. Others have looked for statistical patterns that might connect the glyphs to the modern Rapa Nui language. The most promising work involves using computers to analyze the frequency and order of the symbols, searching for the syntactic rules that govern their use. Despite these efforts, no one has yet produced a convincing, full translation. The code remains unbroken. The haunting message of the Rongorongo tablets, therefore, is not in the undeciphered glyphs, but in the story of their survival. They are a stark monument to cultural resilience and a sobering reminder of how easily knowledge can be extinguished. They represent a voice that was deliberately silenced, a library that was burned, and a people who were severed from a core part of their identity. Each carefully carved line on these ancient pieces of wood is an echo of a lost world, a plea from the past asking not just to be read but to be remembered. From the tragic silence of Rapa Nui, we find ourselves transported to a world of eloquent words and literary genius. But even here, in the most celebrated book in the English language, secrets may be hiding in plain sight. In 1623, 7 years after William Shakespeare's death, two of his fellow actors, John Heminges and Henry Condell, compiled 36 of his plays into a single monumental volume. We know it today as the First Folio, and without it, masterpieces like Macbeth and The Tempest might have been lost forever. Yet for all its historical importance, the book's introductory pages contain a series of enigmatic dedications that have fueled centuries of speculation. Could these seemingly flowery tributes hold a concealed message, perhaps pointing to the true identity of the author or a secret patron who made it all possible? The most scrutinized of these texts is the dedication to the enigmatic Mr. W.H., described as the only begetter of the sonnets in the folio's first edition. The identity of this mysterious figure has been a literary detective story for over 400 years. The initials themselves are reversed from the more obvious W. S for William Shakespeare, immediately sparking theories that this was a deliberate cipher. Candidates for Mr. W.H. range from William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, to Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, with some even suggesting the initials refer to the boy actor who first played Shakespeare's female roles. But the phrase begetter is the real puzzle. Does it mean the person who inspired the sonnets, the one who procured them for publication, or something else entirely? This single cryptic line is a literary black hole, pulling in endless interpretation but giving no definitive answer. Beyond the initials, scholars have long examined the folio's typesetting for anomalies that might suggest a hidden layer of meaning. The practice of steganography, concealing a message within an innocent text, was well known in Elizabethan England, often used for political or personal secrecy. Some researchers have applied Baconian cipher techniques, named for the philosopher Francis Bacon, who was a proponent of such methods, to the dedication's letter patterns. They search for consistencies in font variations, unusual spacings, or italicizations that could signal a coded numerical system. The aim is to find a pattern that, when decoded, spells out a name or a truth the compilers felt they could not state openly. One compelling theory suggests the dedications are not about a person, but a plea. The Folio was an expensive and risky publishing venture. The dedications to the powerful Earls of Pembroke and Montgomery are effusive in their praise, which was standard practice for the time. But reading between the lines, some historians hear a different message, a carefully disguised apology. The plays contained politically sensitive material, lampooning royalty and questioning power structures. A too blatant dedication to a noble patron could be seen as an admission of their involvement or approval, potentially putting them in danger. The hidden message, then, might be one of subtle exoneration, a way for Hemingers and Condell to honor their friends while also protecting them from any fallout from the crown. The most dramatic interpretation proposes that the Folio's front matter is a complex autobiographical puzzle left by Shakespeare himself. Proponents of alternative authorship theories who believe someone like Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, wrote the plays see the dedications as a grand clue. They argue the convoluted praise, the odd capitalization of words like wisdom and judgment, and the very structure of the verses are a map meant to guide the discerning reader to the truth of the author's noble identity, a truth that could not be revealed in his lifetime without causing a scandal. Yet for all the intrigue, the most likely hidden message in the first folio might be the simplest and most human. It is a message of preservation and love from fellow artists. Hemingers and Condell weren't cryptographers, they were actors who had worked alongside Shakespeare for decades. Their stated goal was to present his plays as he conceived them, countering the diverse stolny and surreptitious copies that were in circulation. The true code may not be in the letters but in the act itself. The hidden message is their monumental effort to save the work of their friend from oblivion, ensuring that the star of poets would never truly fade. It is a farewell and a testament carved not in stone but in type, and it has successfully delivered its most important meaning to us across the centuries. Remember me. From the grand literary mystery of the first folio, we now turn to a puzzle that is intimate, elegant, and perhaps even melodic. It was the summer of 1897, and the esteemed English composer Edward Elgar, riding high on the success of his Enigma variations, sent a curiously encoded letter to a young friend. The recipient was Dora Penny, the 22-year-old daughter of a local reverend, whom Elgar affectionately nicknamed Dorabella. The message itself was written on a small card, a mere 3 lines of text composed of 87 whimsical, squiggly characters that resembled nothing more than dancing notes on a musical staff or the idle doodles of a relaxed mind. This is the Dorabella cipher, and for over a century, its brief, graceful message has stood as one of the most charming and infuriating unsolved codes in history. Elgar was a man deeply fascinated by ciphers, puzzles, and mysteries. This was, after all, the composer who embedded a hidden, dark saying within his famous Enigma variations, a musical theme that has never been identified. He enjoyed codes as a personal intellectual pastime, often exchanging encrypted messages with his wife and friends. The context of the Dorabella note is crucial to understanding its possible meaning. Dora Penny was a lively, beloved figure in Elgar's social circle, known for her slight stammer and her warm personality. The message was sent shortly after a pleasant holiday they had all spent together. There was no apparent need for high-level secrecy. This was likely a piece of playful, flirtatious correspondence between friends. The cipher's symbols are its greatest clue and its greatest obstacle. Elgar himself left a hint in his personal papers, a handwritten alphabet of similar squiggles, assigning each symbol to a letter. This should have been the master key, but it only deepened the mystery. When cryptographers apply this alphabet to the ciphertext, the result is a jumble of largely unintelligible letters. It reads in part, MEEDRRNTHEOREENIAEORETEUSENDESIFTHENTHRSTEND. This suggests that either Elgar's provided key is incomplete, the cipher is more complex than a simple substitution, or he made deliberate errors to obscure the message for all but its intended recipient. This has led to a compelling and persistent theory that the Dorabella cipher is not a linguistic code at all, but a musical one. The symbols bear a striking resemblance to musical notation, specifically the semicircular marks known as musical rests, which indicate silence. Could Elgar have been encoding a private melody for Dorabella? Perhaps the squiggles represent a rhythm or a series of intervals rather than words. Some attempts at decryption have treated the symbols' angles and orientations as indicators of pitch on a scale. If true, the message would be a tiny, personal composition, a musical inside joke that only a composer and his musically literate friend could share. The idea that a nation's greatest composer might express himself in a visual melody is incredibly alluring. Of course, numerous linguistic solutions have been proposed over the decades. Some analysts believe it is a complex polyalphabetic cipher, where the same symbol can represent different letters depending on its position. Others suggest it is written in a highly abbreviated form of English or even in another language like Latin. One of the more creative interpretations posits that the message is a reflection on the holiday itself, perhaps a light-hearted tease about Dora's stammer, rendered private through code to avoid embarrassment. Another theory, given Elgar's known struggles with his Roman Catholic faith in a predominantly Protestant country, suggests it could contain a brief, personal religious sentiment he wished to keep concealed. The reason the Dorabella cipher remains so stubbornly unsolved, despite the efforts of legendary codebreakers like the team at Bletchley Park, lies in its personal nature. Unlike state-sponsored military codes, which follow logical rules and patterns to be understood by multiple operators, this was a one-off message crafted by one eccentric mind for one specific person. It could be filled with inside jokes, personal abbreviations, or even deliberate errors known only to Elgar and Dora. Without a much larger sample of his ciphering style or a clear Rosetta Stone from his notes, every attempt at decryption is ultimately a guess. The code is a locked door, and the key was thrown away over a century ago by the only two people who knew how it worked. In the end, the true hidden message of the Dorabella cipher may be about the nature of privacy itself. In our modern age of digital permanence, where every text and email is stored and scanned, Elgar's elegant squiggles represent a different time. They are a testament to the beautiful, fleeting nature of a private thought, shared in a moment of friendship and never meant for the world to hear. It is a secret that has been perfectly kept, a whisper from a summer holiday in 1897 that has faded into a graceful, silent dance of symbols on a page, forever enchanting us precisely because we cannot hear its tune. While the Dorabella cipher represents a private, playful secret, our next hidden message speaks to one of history's most public and tantalizing mysteries, one that has driven men and women to dig up the countryside for over a century. It's a story that begins in the early 1800s with a man named Thomas J. Beale and a locked iron box. According to the legend, Beale was the leader of a band of 30 adventurers who discovered a massive vein of gold and silver out west, likely in what is now Colorado. They amassed a colossal treasure which they then transported across the continent and buried for safekeeping in a secret vault in Bedford County, Virginia. Beale himself then created 3 separate ciphers detailing everything. The first described the exact location of the treasure vault, the second detailed the contents of the treasure itself, and the third provided the names and residences of the treasure's owners, their next of kin. He placed these 3 encrypted pages into the iron box and entrusted it to an innkeeper named Robert Morris in Lynchburg, Virginia, in 1822. Beale promised to return with the key, but he and his men vanished, never to be seen again. For years, the box sat unopened in Morris's care, its contents a complete mystery. It wasn't until 1845, long after any hope of Beale's return had faded, that Morris finally broke the lock. Inside, he found the 3 sheets of numbers completely indecipherable. He spent the next 20 years trying and failing to crack the codes, eventually passing the entire puzzle on to a friend before his death. This anonymous friend then took up the challenge, and after another 2 decades of work, he experienced a single, stunning breakthrough. He managed to solve only one of the 3 ciphers, cipher number 2, which described the treasure. The key, he discovered, was the Declaration of Independence. By taking the first letter of each word in the declaration, the first word providing the first number, and so on, he could use that sequence as a key to decode the numbers on the page. Applying this method, the numbers transformed into a coherent English text. The decoded message revealed a treasure of almost unimaginable scale: 1,014 pounds of gold, 3,012 pounds of silver, and jewels valued at $13,000 in the currency of the time. In today's value, we're talking about a hoard worth tens of millions of dollars. This incredible success, however, only made the failure to solve the other 2 ciphers all the more agonizing. The friend published a pamphlet in 1885, now known as the Beale Papers, containing the entire story and all 3 ciphers, offering them to the world in the hopes that someone else could succeed where he had failed. And thus, a modern legend was born. For over a century, amateur and professional cryptanalysts have applied every technique imaginable to ciphers number 1 and 3, but both have resisted all attempts at decryption. The Declaration of Independence key does not work for them, leading to endless speculation about what the true key text might be. Could it be the Magna Carta, the Constitution, the plays of Shakespeare, or even a specific passage from the Bible? To this day, no one knows. The enduring allure of the Beale ciphers lies in a perfect storm of elements. There's the romantic, Wild West adventure of the treasure's discovery, the tragic disappearance of Beale and his men, and the tantalizing fact that one of the 3 codes was genuinely broken, proving the papers are not just a random jumble of numbers. This single success validates the entire story for many believers, fueling the dreams of treasure hunters who have scoured the hills around Bedford County with shovels and metal detectors for generations. Some have even lost their life savings in the pursuit. Yet, a powerful counter-narrative has emerged over the decades, the theory that the entire saga is an elaborate hoax. Skeptics point to the fact that the only solved cipher uses a key, the Declaration of Independence, that was published and widely available. They argue that a clever forger, possibly even the anonymous friend who published the pamphlet, could have created the one solvable cipher to lend credibility to 2 completely random, unsolvable ones. The story's publication in a pamphlet also raises the question of motive. Was it a work of fiction designed to sell copies, a real puzzle, or an attempt to lure investors into a fraudulent treasure hunting scheme? The hidden message of the Beale ciphers, therefore, operates on 2 distinct levels. On one hand, it is a literal mathematical challenge, a siren call to every codebreaker and armchair detective, promising immense wealth to the ones smart enough to see through its numerical veil. On a deeper level, its true message is about the powerful human drive for discovery and the eternal appeal of a mystery. It asks us what we are willing to believe and how far we are willing to go for the chance of a legendary reward. Whether the treasure is physically buried in Virginia or not, the Beale ciphers have successfully buried something else in our collective consciousness, an unshakable hope that somewhere just beneath the surface, an incredible secret is waiting to be found. Our journey now takes us from the coded numbers of the New World to a truly bizarre artifact that bridges 2 of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. It is a book, but not one made of paper or parchment. It is a manuscript meticulously woven from linen, its words written in a language no one has spoken for over 2,000 years. This is the Liber Linteus, the Linen Book of Zagreb, and its journey to discovery is as strange as the message it contains. Unlike any other text from antiquity, this Etruscan manuscript was not found in a library or a tomb in Italy. Instead, it was discovered in the most improbable of places, wrapped around the body of an Egyptian mummy. In the mid-19th century, a Croatian official serving in Egypt purchased an elaborately decorated sarcophagus containing the mummy of a woman, which he then shipped back to his home in Zagreb as a souvenir. For years, it was displayed as a curiosity, but then experts noticed something extraordinary. The long-forgotten scraps of linen wrapping the body were not typical bandages, they were covered with faint handwritten script. Someone had carefully cut up a precious, ancient book to use as mummy-packing material. The text was painstakingly reconstructed, revealing the longest surviving Etruscan document in the world, a sacred text that now resides in Croatia, far from both its Etruscan origins and its Egyptian resting place. The content of the Liber Linteus, once scholars could piece it together, was clearly ritualistic. It is a liturgical calendar, a detailed series of instructions for priests on how to conduct ceremonies throughout the year. The text is organized into sections, each prescribing the specific offerings to be made to various gods on particular days. We encounter instructions for sacrifices of milk, wine, and grains, for the correct ways to address deities, and for the purification rites required for a sacred space. It is a meticulous how-to guide for maintaining the favor of the divine, a direct window into the spiritual life of the Etruscan people. The hidden message here is not a single secret, but the entire operational manual of a state religion, a belief system that was the bedrock of Etruscan society and power. And yet, for all its incredible preservation and clear structure, the book's core message remains frustratingly out of reach. This is because the Etruscan language itself is one of history's great linguistic locks, and we have yet to find the key. We can read the letters the Etruscans adapted the Greek alphabet so the characters are familiar. We can even decipher some words, particularly the names of gods and numbers, which appear frequently in ritual context. But the overall meaning of most sentences is a mystery. The language has no known living relatives. It is not an Indo-European language like Latin or Greek. Without a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone that pairs a lengthy Etruscan passage with a fully understood language, we can only grasp at fragments of this rich theological text. We see the outline of the ritual, but we cannot hear the prayers or understand the deeper theological significance behind the actions. This inability to fully translate the world's longest Etruscan text is the ultimate irony and the central tragedy of the Liber Linteus. We hold in our hands a complete sacred document, a direct line to the priests and worshippers of a lost culture, but we are largely deaf to its meaning. The book is a detailed map to a treasure we cannot claim. We know it describes the worship of gods like Tinia, Uni, and Minerva, the counterparts to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, but we don't know the stories or prayers that gave these figures their power. We see the recipe for the ceremony, but we are missing the soul of the faith. The very fact that this Etruscan text ended up in Egypt only deepens the mystery. How did a linen book, so sacred that its contents dictated the rites of a powerful Italian civilization, become mere stuffing for a completely unrelated Egyptian burial? The prevailing theory is a story of cultural recycling. In the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic was systematically conquering and absorbing the Etruscan cities. As their culture was suppressed, their sacred objects may have lost their value to all but a few. A Roman collector, or perhaps even an Egyptian merchant with a taste for the exotic, might have acquired the Liber Linteus. Knowing its material value but ignorant of or indifferent to its religious significance, they saw a large sheet of high-quality, durable linen. In a practical move, they cut it into strips, a fate unimaginable for a functioning sacred text, and sold it to an Egyptian funeral workshop that needed wrappings for a wealthy woman's mummy. A holy book became a commodity, its divine words silenced beneath resin and bandages, its message hidden not by code but by a profound shift in power and belief. So the ultimate hidden message of the Liber Linteus is one of profound cultural loss and historical irony. It is a message about the fragility of knowledge and the arbitrary ways in which history is preserved. The Etruscans, whom the Romans themselves considered deeply religious and mystically powerful, have largely vanished from the historical record, leaving behind stunning art and tombs but few of their own words. The Liber Linteus is their greatest literary survivor, a book that cheated oblivion only by being repurposed for a different kind of eternity. It survived not because its message was cherished, but because its material was useful. It now sits in a museum, a sacred text from one culture that was used to mummify a woman from another, a silent, linen-bound witness to the rise and fall of empires, waiting for the day we might finally learn to understand its prayers. Leaving behind the linen-wrapped mysteries of the Etruscans, we travel even further back in time to one of the world's oldest and most expansive urban civilizations, a society that flourished alongside ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia yet remains infinitely more mysterious. In the vast river plains of what is now Pakistan and northwest India, the Indus Valley civilization built meticulously planned cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, complete with sophisticated drainage systems, public baths, and standardized weights and measures. They were a powerhouse of trade and engineering from around 2600 BC to 1900 BC, and then they vanished, leaving behind their incredible ruins and one of history's most perplexing puzzles: thousands of inscribed objects covered in a script that no one has ever been able to read. This is the Indus Valley script, and its hidden messages could rewrite the earliest chapters of human history. The script itself appears on a variety of artifacts, but most famously on small, square stone seals, typically made of steatite. These seals are exquisite, often featuring a beautifully carved animal, a majestic bull, a powerful rhinoceros, a mythical unicorn-like creature, with a short inscription of symbols placed in a line above it. These symbols are the heart of the mystery. They are not pictures of the animals below them. They are a separate set of graphic signs, ranging from simple strokes and geometric shapes to more complex depictions of fish, insects, pots, and human figures. In total, scholars have identified between 400 and 600 distinct signs, though many are variations of a core set, suggesting a writing system that used a manageable number of basic characters, much like an alphabet or a syllabary. For decades, the primary assumption was that this was a true writing system, encoding a spoken language, likely a precursor to the Dravidian languages spoken in southern India today. The inscriptions are short, usually averaging only 4 or 5 symbols, but they appear in a consistent, standardized way across a huge geographic area, indicating they were not random personal marks but a shared system of communication. The seals often have a pierced knob on the back, suggesting they were used to impress a mark onto clay or wax, perhaps to label trade goods, signify ownership, or authenticate documents written on perishable materials like palm leaves or cloth that have long since decayed. The hidden messages on these seals could be names of merchants, deities, cities, or legal titles, the bureaucratic DNA of a vast, organized society. However, a fierce and fascinating debate has emerged challenging this very foundation. A minority of respected scholars, led by figures like Steve Farmer, argue that the Indus symbols do not represent a language at all. They propose that it is a system of non-linguistic signs or proto-writing. In this view, the symbols are not forming words or sentences that can be read aloud. Instead, they function more like religious or political logos, heraldic devices, or clan symbols that convey information through recognized imagery without encoding a specific language. They compare it to modern road signs or the iconography on a computer desktop, universally understood, but not read in a linguistic sense. This theory points to the extreme brevity of the inscriptions, the lack of any longer texts which you would expect for administrative records, and the fact that the symbols never show the kind of repetition and grammatical structure seen in deciphered ancient languages. This debate is not merely academic, it strikes at the core of how we understand this civilization. If the symbols are a true script, then the Indus Valley people had a full written language, placing them on par with their contemporaries in Egypt and Sumer. We could potentially learn their names, their myths, their laws, and their history in their own words. If it is proto-writing, it suggests a different but no less sophisticated path of development, a complex society that managed its affairs and expressed its identity through a powerful, non-linguistic symbolic system. The hidden message would then be about a unique cognitive approach to communication, one we are only beginning to appreciate. The quest for an answer has moved into the digital age. Modern computer scientists and statisticians have entered the fray, applying powerful algorithms to analyze the script structure. They have fed the entire corpus of known inscriptions into computers to search for patterns in the order and frequency of the symbols. Do they follow the statistical rules of language like Zipf's law, which states that in any linguistic corpus, a few words are used very frequently while most are used rarely? Some studies say yes, finding patterns consistent with a linguistic system. Others have found that the sequences might be too short and rigid to demonstrate this conclusively. Advanced techniques have even been used to try and deduce the underlying grammatical rules, but without a bilingual text or a known relative language to provide a key, even the most powerful computer hits a wall. The data is trapped in a silent loop, its patterns hinting at meaning but never quite revealing it. The frustration is palpable because the stakes are so high. Deciphering this script would be like switching on a light in a dark room, instantly illuminating every aspect of Indus Valley life. We could finally understand the precise purpose of the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro. Was it a religious site, a social hub, or both? We could read the labels on their trade goods and trace their networks across the ancient world. Most importantly, we could learn why this incredibly advanced civilization collapsed. Was it climate change, a devastating invasion, or something else? The answers are almost certainly encoded in those tiny, elegant symbols, so the Indus Valley script remains history's most tantalizing locked door. We can see the keyhole, we can even feel the shape of the key with our statistical models, but we cannot yet turn the lock. Each animal seal, with its proud beast and cryptic caption, is a silent emissary from a lost world, holding a message that has waited over 4,000 years to be delivered. It is an enduring reminder that some of history's greatest secrets aren't hidden in treasure vaults or buried tombs. They are displayed in museums all over the world, openly challenging us to listen just a little bit harder. Moving from the grand, undeciphered script of an entire civilization, we find a mystery that is both more intimate and somehow even more perplexing. It is a book that should not exist, a volume that feels utterly out of place in time and geography. Known as the Rohonk Codex, this strange manuscript first appeared in Hungary in the early 19th century, donated to the library of the Rohonk Academy by a count who claimed it had been in his family for centuries. From the moment scholars laid eyes on it, they knew they were dealing with something truly anomalous, an artifact that defies every conventional category with its bewildering blend of unknown script and bizarre, cross-cultural religious imagery. The physical object itself is a small, dense tome of 448 pages, each made of an unusual vellum that has darkened with age, but it is the content that has caused over 2 centuries of academic head-scratching. The codex is filled from edge to edge with a script completely unlike any other writing system on Earth. It consists of nearly 200 unique characters, a mix of simple geometric shapes and more complex symbols that some have described as looking like a frantic flock of birds or a collection of tiny, abstract runes. The text is written from right to left, and the symbols often connect to one another, suggesting a cursive hand. This is not random scribbling. The consistency and structure of the script clearly indicate a sophisticated writing system with rules and grammar. Yet it correlates to nothing we know. Even more baffling than the script are the illustrations. The codex is lavishly illustrated with scenes that seem plucked from a dozen different faiths and flung together into a single, confusing theological collage. There are clear depictions of Christian iconography, Jesus on the cross, the resurrection, and what appear to be saints. But right alongside them are symbols that feel distinctly Islamic, like crescents and what might be representations of Mecca. Then there are scenes that suggest Hindu or Buddhist influences, with figures sitting in lotus positions beneath what could be a bodhi tree. There are even illustrations of castles with distinctively European architectural features. This isn't just a mixed message, it's a full-blown religious and cultural fusion that seems impossible for its presumed time period. This visual chaos is the core of the codex's mystery and the source of its greatest controversy. If it is a genuine medieval manuscript, as its materials and wear might suggest, its creation would represent a staggering historical anomaly. The peaceful co-mingling of Christian, Islamic, and Eastern religious motifs in a single devotional text from that era is virtually unheard of, especially in Europe, which was often a theater of religious conflict. This has led many experts to a different, more cynical conclusion, that the Voynich Codex is an elaborate and brilliant forgery, created perhaps in the 18th or early 19th century to be sold as a priceless antique to a wealthy, gullible nobleman. The forgery theory is compelling. The time of its appearance coincides with a period of intense fascination with the occult and the exotic East in Europe. A skilled forger, possibly someone with knowledge of multiple religious traditions, could have invented a script and populated the pages with a pastiche of imagery designed to look ancient and profoundly mystical. The goal would not have been to create a coherent religious text, but to craft an object of irresistible mystery and perceived value. In this light, the Codex isn't a message waiting to be decoded. It's a work of art, a deliberate deception whose only true message is a testament to human gullibility and the lucrative market for antiquities. Yet the Codex has its staunch defenders who believe it is authentic. Some linguists point to the statistical properties of the text, arguing that its character frequency and word length distribution are consistent with a natural language, not a random invention. They propose it could be the sole surviving document of a small, heretical religious sect that syncretized beliefs from across the known world, perhaps the Bogomils or the Paulicians, who were known for their unorthodox views and had trade routes that stretched into Asia. In this scenario, the Codex is a sacred text for a community that saw the divine in all faiths, a radical and hidden message of religious tolerance that was carefully preserved in a unique, secret script to avoid persecution. The decipherment attempts have been as varied as the theories about its origin. Over 40 serious efforts have been made to crack the code, each proposing a different source language as the key. Would-be deciphers have claimed the underlying text is everything from Old Hungarian to Hindi, from Latin to Basque. One of the most publicized attempts suggested it was written in an early form of Daco-Romanian, a theory that garnered significant attention but was ultimately rejected by most academics due to inconsistencies and assumptions in the translation. Other attempts have employed complex mathematical models and computer algorithms, searching for the kind of patterns that eventually broke the code of the Zodiac Killer's ciphers, but the Voynich script has resisted all such modern assaults. The very nature of the text makes it a cryptographer's nightmare. Without a known related language, without a bilingual text, and without even a clear historical context to anchor it, every decipherment attempt is built on a foundation of guesswork. A researcher can decide the script is alphabetic, syllabic, or logographic, and each choice leads down a vastly different path with no way to verify which is correct. It is the ultimate circular puzzle. You must understand the content to decipher the script, but you must decipher the script to understand the content. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Voynich Codex is what it reveals about our own desire for discovery. It serves as a Rorschach test for historians and amateur sleuths alike. Those who look at its pages see what they want to see: proof of a lost civilization, evidence of ancient global connectivity, or a masterpiece of deception. Its stubborn silence forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the boundaries of historical possibility. It is a book that holds up a mirror, and the reflection we see is not of a forgotten author, but of our own endless fascination with the unknown. It asks us whether we are looking for a truth to be uncovered, or if we are simply in love with the mystery itself. While the Voynich Codex presents a global fusion of faiths that may be entirely invented, our next discovery offers a message that is both deeply rooted in a single culture and astonishingly concrete. Imagine a civilization so convinced of the power of the written word that they would cast their most important messages not on fragile papyrus or parchment, but into the very walls of sacred, bronze vessels meant to last for eternity. This was the practice of the ancient Chinese during the Shang and Zhou dynasties over 3,000 years ago. The ritual bronze vessels they produced are among the most magnificent artifacts of the ancient world, but their true hidden messages are not in their stunning artistic detail. They are in the inscriptions carefully cast inside, texts that served as the official records of a civilization's soul. These weren't mere decorations or simple labels. The casting of a bronze vessel was an enormously expensive and technically demanding process, reserved for the most elite members of society, kings, queens, and high-ranking nobles. The inscriptions they commissioned were therefore events of immense importance. The messages, typically ranging from a few characters to several hundred, were first carved in reverse onto the clay mold used to cast the bronze. When the molten metal filled the mold and cooled, the text would appear in sharp relief on the finished vessel's interior, preserving the words forever in gleaming, durable metal. This act of permanent preservation was itself a core part of the message. These words were meant to endure, to be seen by the gods and by countless generations to come. So what did these permanent records say? The inscriptions served multiple crucial functions, each a hidden layer of meaning waiting to be unpacked. Many were cast to commemorate a specific ritual, a sacrifice to a royal ancestor, a ceremony to mark a military victory, or a celebration of a new appointment to court. The text would detail the exact occasion, the offerings made, and the names of the participants. But this was more than just keeping a diary. It was a contractual agreement with the divine. By recording the ceremony, the owner was providing proof to the ancestral spirits that the correct rites had been performed, thereby ensuring their continued favor and protection. The vessel itself, often a food container like a ding or a wine pourer like a gu, was the tool used in the ritual, and the inscription inside was its certificate of authenticity, its sacred receipt. Beyond the rituals, these bronzes functioned as the primary legal documents of the state. Kings used them to grant land, titles, and valuable gifts to their loyal vassals. A long inscription might describe a royal audience where the king praised a noble service and rewarded him with a specific plot of land, a number of bronze coins, or even a group of servants. The noble would then have this royal decree cast into a bronze vessel not just as a trophy, but as a legal deed. It was his immutable, divinely witnessed proof of ownership that could be presented to anyone who might later dispute his claim. The hidden message here was one of power, legitimacy, and the emerging rule of law, all sanctioned by the mandate of heaven. Perhaps the most personal and profound messages were genealogical. Many inscriptions conclude with a prayer and a statement of intent. A noble might state that he had this vessel made to honor his illustrious father or grandfather, and that he hoped his own sons and grandsons would forever treasure it and use it in their own rituals to honor him. This creates a direct material link across generations. The vessel becomes a family heirloom in the most powerful sense, an object that physically connects the living to the dead and the yet-to-be-born through a shared written covenant. The hidden message is one of continuity. Remember me, honor our ancestors as I have, and may our line continue forever. The content of these inscriptions has been absolutely fundamental in rewriting the history of early China. Before their study, much of what we knew about the Shang and Zhou dynasties came from later historical texts, which were often written centuries after the fact and colored by the biases of their own time. The bronze inscriptions provide a contemporaneous first-hand account. They give us the actual names of kings and nobles, confirm the dates of battles, and outline the structure of early Chinese government and land ownership directly from the people who lived it. They are a primary source of unparalleled reliability, effectively hiding the true historical record in plain sight for millennia, waiting for scholars to learn how to read their ancient script. The very language of these inscriptions adds another layer of secrecy. The script used is known as Jinwen or bronze script, a later evolution of the oracle bone script but still vastly different from modern Chinese characters. For centuries, even after the vessels were unearthed, their messages remained hidden because the ability to read this ancient writing had been lost. It was only through meticulous scholarship, comparing the forms of characters across different vessels and slowly building a lexicon, that the code was broken. This decipherment was like tuning a radio to a forgotten frequency, suddenly allowing the voices of kings and courtiers from 3,000 years ago to speak directly to us, sharing their fears, their ambitions, and their devotion. Ultimately, the hidden message of Chinese ritual bronzes is about the human desire to conquer time itself. In an age without digital storage or paper records, these powerful objects were designed to be a permanent, indestructible archive. They were created with the explicit hope that they would outlast dynasties, wars, and the slow decay of memory. They are time capsules forged in fire and metal, sent into the future with a clear directive. Witness our rituals, acknowledge our laws, remember our names, and in doing so, keep our world alive. Every time we read one of these inscriptions today, we are fulfilling that ancient wish, completing a cycle of memory that began in a bronze foundry over 30 centuries ago. Moving from the grand, state-sanctioned messages cast in Chinese bronze, we find a far more personal and humble form of communication hidden within the pages of a book that was itself a symbol of immense power and faith. Imagine a scribe hunched over his desk in a dimly lit scriptorium, his hand carefully tracing the shimmering silver and gold ink on a page of rich purple-stained vellum. This is the Codex Argenteus, the Silver Bible, a breathtaking 6th century manuscript containing Bishop Wulfila's 4th century translation of the Gospels into the Gothic language. It is a book fit for a king, a masterpiece of Ostrogothic Italy under Theodoric the Great. But if you look beyond the majestic, formal script of the sacred text itself, you discover another story whispered in the margins, a story not of kings and bishops, but of the very human individuals who protected, studied, and preserved this treasure across the centuries. These marginal annotations are the true hidden messages of the Codex Argenteus. They are the fingerprints left behind by readers and guardians, a palimpsest of human interaction layered over the divine word. The most common of these are corrections. A later scribe, perhaps comparing the text to another manuscript, would notice a mistake in a letter or a word. With a careful hand, they would add the correct Gothic letter above the line or in the margin. These tiny edits, often in a different ink, show a meticulous devotion to textual accuracy. This wasn't vandalism, it was an act of profound respect, a commitment to ensuring that the word of God transmitted to the Goths remained pure and uncorrupted. Each correction is a silent argument against the idea of the so-called Dark Ages as a time of ignorance. It reveals a scholarly tradition keenly aware of the importance of precise transmission. But the margins hold more than just fixes. They also contain what linguists call glosses, short notes that explain or translate a difficult Gothic word. In some places, a later reader, likely in the early Middle Ages when knowledge of the Gothic language was fading, has written a word in Latin or even a vernacular Germanic dialect next to a Gothic term they feared might become obsolete. This is incredibly poignant. It shows a reader grappling with a text that was already becoming a historical artifact, someone who was actively working to bridge a growing linguistic gap. They knew the content was precious, and they were determined that its meaning should not be lost, leaving behind these small, scholarly breadcrumbs for future generations. Then there are the annotations that are purely personal, and these are perhaps the most captivating. On one page, a scribe has practiced writing the Gothic alphabet, running through the letters as if testing his pen or refreshing his memory. On another, there is a simple, heartfelt prayer written in Latin, a plea for God's mercy or for the soul of a loved one, nestled beside the printed gospel. This transforms the book from an impersonal object of veneration into an intimate devotional tool. We can almost see the reader pausing in their study to offer a private supplication, using the sacred space of the page to carry their personal thoughts to heaven. The hidden message here is one of individual faith, a direct and emotional connection to the divine that exists alongside the formal liturgy of the text. The most mysterious of these marginal additions, however, are the possible cryptographic elements. Scholars have noted strange sequences of letters, unusual abbreviations, or seemingly random characters dotted throughout the margins of certain pages. Some propose these could be coded ownership marks, a way for a library or a monastery to identify the book in a cryptic manner known only to them, a safeguard against theft. Others wonder if they represent a form of shorthand used by a particular scholarly community, notes that are now indecipherable because we lack the key to their meaning. The most tantalizing theory suggests that during periods of religious persecution, keepers of the codex might have used these symbols to mark passages of particular doctrinal importance or to leave hidden messages for other believers, turning the margins into a secret bulletin board. The journey of the Codex Argenteus itself is written in these annotations. The book eventually found its way to the scriptorium of the Benedictine Abbey at Werden in Germany, and later to the court of Emperor Rudolf II in Prague, a known collector of the strange and mysterious. The notes from these periods reflect the concerns of its new caretakers, Carolingian monks, ensuring its preservation, Renaissance humanists marveling at its antiquity. Each generation that possessed the book left its own faint mark, a layered history of European thought and devotion inscribed around the edges of the Gothic text. These annotations collectively tell a parallel history of the Codex, a biography of the object itself and its relationship with the people who cherished it. Ultimately, the power of these marginalia lies in their humanity. The majestic, calligraphic Gothic text of the Silver Bible speaks with the authoritative voice of the Church and the Crown. But the whispers in the margins are the voices of the individuals, the scribes, the scholars, the monks, the devout believers who formed a living chain across centuries to ensure this voice was not silenced. They correct it, they explain it, they pray over it, and they practice from it. They reveal that the survival of a great masterpiece often depends not on grand decrees, but on the quiet, dedicated, and sometimes anxious work of countless unknown hands. The Codex Argenteus is not just a translation of the Bible, it is a diary of its own survival, and its most valuable hidden messages are the humble Mark's Chinese letter that it was loved. Deep within the steamy jungles of Central America, the ancient Maya built a civilization whose intellectual achievements were nothing short of astronomical. For centuries, the intricate glyphs covering their stelae, temple walls, and codices were seen as mere artwork, a beautiful but indecipherable remnant of a lost culture. It wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century that the code was truly broken, revealing that these were not simple pictures, but a sophisticated writing system, and that its most profound hidden messages were written in the language of the stars themselves. The Maya were arguably the most accomplished astronomers of the ancient world, and they embedded their celestial knowledge directly into the fabric of their society, using it to justify the divine right of their kings and to predict the very cycles of time. The foundation of their cosmic understanding was their calendar system, a breathtakingly complex and precise interlocking of cycles that is perhaps their greatest intellectual legacy. Unlike our relatively simple Gregorian calendar, the Maya used three separate but simultaneous counts of time. The first was the 260-day sacred round, or Tzolk'in, a cycle that intertwined 13 numbers with 20-day names used for divination and religious ceremony. The second was the 365-day vague year, or Hob, consisting of 18 months of 20 days each, plus a final, ominous 5-day period considered to be extremely unlucky. But the real key to their long-term astronomical predictions was the third calendar, the long count. This was a linear count of days from a mythical starting point, which scholars correlate to August 11, 3114 BC in our calendar. The long count allowed them to track vast expanses of time with pinpoint accuracy, and it is within the inscriptions recording these long cycles that their most specific celestial predictions are found. This obsession with timekeeping was not born from a simple desire to mark the seasons for agriculture. For the Maya, time itself was sacred and cyclical. They believed that events repeated themselves in great cycles, and by understanding the patterns of the past, one could predict the future. This is where astronomy became the ultimate tool of power. Their rulers, the Kayuhul-Ajor, or Holy Lords, were seen as the intermediaries between the earthly realm and the cosmos. Their ability to accurately predict celestial events, especially those that were terrifying or unpredictable, was presented as proof of their divine connection and their ability to maintain the cosmic order. A king who could announce an upcoming eclipse was not just a ruler, he was a master of time, a shaman who could reassure his people that the sun would indeed return and that chaos would be kept at bay. Perhaps the most stunning example of this is their work on the cycle of Venus. The Maya meticulously tracked the movements of this brilliant star, which they associated with the god Kukulkan, or the feathered serpent. They calculated its synodic period, the time it takes to return to the same point in the sky relative to the sun, to be 584 days, a figure incredibly close to our modern calculation of 583.92 days. Their hidden messages, encoded in the Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian books, show detailed Venus tables that predict its appearances as both the morning and the evening star for cycles stretching hundreds of years into the future. But this wasn't just scientific observation, it had a direct and grim impact on their warfare. Venus's first appearance as the morning star after a period of invisibility was seen as a dangerously inauspicious time. Inscriptions and historical records indicate that Maya kings would often planned and launched military campaigns to coincide with these specific celestial events, believing the influence of the war-like Venus god would grant them victory. The motion of a planet millions of miles away was thus directly dictating the fate of kingdoms on Earth. Their understanding of solar and lunar eclipses was equally advanced and integrated into their worldview. Eclipses were moments of profound fear, seen as a potential bite being taken out of the sun or moon, an attack by malevolent forces that could plunge the world into permanent darkness. The Maya identified the 6,585-day period of the lunar Saros cycle, which governs the repetition of eclipses. By tracking this cycle within their long count calendar, their priests were able to predict when an eclipse was likely to occur. An inscription on a monument at the site of Tortuguero, for instance, contains a prophecy referencing a future event that scholars believe corresponds to a solar eclipse. The ability to stand before the people and announce, "On this day the sun will be darkened, but I, your king, have foreseen it and will perform the rituals to ensure its return," was an unparalleled demonstration of political and spiritual authority. It transformed a terrifying natural phenomenon into a managed spectacle that reinforced the power structure. The ultimate expression of their cosmological vision is embodied in their architecture. Major structures were not simply placed, they were precisely aligned to serve as permanent astronomical observatories and calendars. The Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza is the most famous example. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the interplay of sunlight and shadow creates the illusion of a massive serpent slithering down the northern staircase, connecting the temple at the top to the stone snakehead at the base. This was a public, dramatic demonstration of the building's function as a giant timekeeping device, linking the earthly realm to the celestial cycle. At Kopan, windows and doorways in certain temples are aligned to frame the setting sun on specific, significant dates like the solstices. These stone messages required no translation. Every citizen could witness the power of their rulers and priests made manifest in the perfect alignment of their world with the heavens. The hidden message in all of this intricate astronomical work is a profound statement about the Maya view of the universe. They saw no separation between the celestial and the terrestrial, between science and religion, between a mathematical calculation and a religious prophecy. It was all part of a single, harmonious and cyclical whole. Their glyphs were the medium for this philosophy, a way to permanently inscribe their understanding of cosmic order into stone, ensuring it would outlast generations. When we finally learned to read their words, we discovered a civilization that looked at the night sky not with simple wonder, but with a razor-sharp intellect, seeing in the dance of the planets a divine script that they alone, among all ancient cultures, had learned to read and used to write their own history in the stars. Yet the true nature of their secrecy was even more profound. It wasn't solely about concealing information from a hostile outside world. It was about creating layers of understanding within their own community. The use of a cipher created a boundary between the ordinary member and the enlightened teacher, between the public reading of a text and its esoteric, hidden interpretation. A passage that seemed straightforward to a new initiate might, with the application of the correct cipher, reveal a deeper mystical meaning or a prophecy about their own teacher of righteousness. This practice transformed scripture from a static text into a living, breathing puzzle, where divine truth was a reward for diligent study and spiritual advancement. The act of decoding became a form of meditation, a ritual in itself that reinforced the community's identity as the guardians of a special, hidden wisdom not available to the unprepared. This culture of concealment extended beyond simple substitution. Some scrolls employ a different tactic altogether, writing the sacred name of God, the Tetragrammaton, in an archaic Paleo-Hebrew script, while the rest of the text is written in the standard square Aramaic script of the period. This was a form of visual cryptography, a way to set the divine name apart and mark it as holier and more potent than the surrounding words. To the trained eye of a sect member, these letters would leap off the page, signaling moments of utmost theological importance and power within a text. It was a constant visual reminder that they were handling something set apart, a secret not just of content, but of sacred presence itself. This meticulous practice shows a community that viewed the very act of writing and reading as a devotional exercise, where every pen stroke and letter form could carry a hidden spiritual charge. The ultimate purpose of all this cryptographic effort was preservation. The Essenes believed they were living in the final days, preparing for an imminent apocalyptic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Their library was not merely a collection of texts, it was an arsenal of spiritual knowledge, a weapon to be protected at all costs. By encoding their most sensitive teachings, their unique calendar calculations, their interpretations of prophecy, their secret hymns, and their community rules, they were ensuring that this powerful knowledge would survive the coming cataclysm. They hid their scrolls in jars within caves not to forget them, but to save them for the righteous who would come after, for the purified remnant who would inherit the earth. In a stunning twist of history, their apocalyptic timing was wrong, but their preservation method was miraculously right. The codes did their job too well, protecting the messages not for a few years, but for 2,000, successfully delivering their secrets to an audience they could never have imagined. For the medieval alchemist, the laboratory was a sacred space where the mysteries of the universe were sought not in distant galaxies, but in the bubbling of flasks and the color changes of boiling metals. Their quest was the magnum opus, the great work, to achieve spiritual perfection through the transmutation of base metals into gold. But this work was dangerous, not only for the risk of explosion or poisoning, but because its perceived power attracted the unwanted attention of both the church and avaricious rulers. To protect their arcane knowledge, they developed an entire literary genre of deliberate obscurity, crafting manuscripts where the true messages were hidden behind a dazzling veil of symbolic imagery, coded language, and allegorical stories. This was not a simple cipher with a single key. The hidden language of alchemy was a multi-layered system of deception and revelation. At its most basic level, the symbol served as a practical code to shield operational secrets from the uninitiated. A recipe that called for the green lion devouring the sun wasn't a call for mythical beast taming. It was a coded instruction for using sulfuric acid, often called the green lion, to dissolve gold, which was universally represented by the sun. Similarly, the marriage of the Red King and the White Queen described the crucial chemical reaction between the volatile mercurial principle and the stable sulfurous principle, a union necessary to create the philosopher's stone. This jargon allowed alchemists to correspond and record their findings without fear that a casual reader could replicate their dangerous and expensive experiments. But the symbolism ran far deeper than mere laboratory shorthand. The entire process of the great work was mapped onto the celestial movements of the planets. Each metal was assigned a planetary ruler. Lead was Saturn, iron was Mars, copper was Venus, silver was the moon, and gold was the sun. An alchemical manuscript might describe a process as the influence of Mars descending upon the realm of Venus, which to the adept meant introducing iron to a copper solution, likely to produce a chemical reaction like cementation. This astrological framework provided a perfect cover. To the suspicious authorities, a text filled with star charts and planetary symbols looked like an astrological treatise, a perfectly acceptable, if slightly suspect, field of study. It camouflaged the practical chemical work within the respected language of cosmology. The imagery itself is where the hidden messages become a breathtaking fusion of art, science, and mysticism. Take the common motif of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. On one level, it represents a closed chemical system, a sealed vessel where materials are continuously cycled and purified through distillation. On a deeper philosophical level, it symbolizes the concept of one is all, the unity and cyclical nature of the cosmos, and the eternal return of matter to its primal state before its transformation. A single, beautifully illustrated symbol could thus simultaneously convey a technical instruction, a cosmological principle, and a stage in the alchemist's own spiritual journey toward enlightenment. Perhaps the most elaborate concealment was achieved through full-blown allegory. Many texts present the entire process as a chivalric romance, a passion play, or a mythological epic. In the famous Splendor Solis manuscripts, the stages of the work are depicted as a series of elaborate flasks, each containing a scene from a symbolic drama. Kings are killed and resurrected, dragons battle eagles, and naked figures represent the purification of the soul. These weren't just pretty pictures, they were a sequential guide. The death of the king represented the Negrido stage where the initial matter was putrefied and blackened. His resurrection in a new form signified the albedo, the whitening that followed. To follow the recipe, one had to interpret the allegory, translating the slaying of a mythological figure into the application of heat to a specific substance for a precise duration. This system of hiding in plain sight created a powerful barrier to entry. It ensured that only those who were truly dedicated, intelligent, and spiritually prepared those willing to spend years in contemplation and study could ever hope to understand the secrets. It filtered out the mere gold seekers, the puffers as they were derisively called, who would blow on their furnaces until they were bankrupt. The true message of these manuscripts was that the transformation of lead into gold was merely the physical echo of a far greater transformation, the transmutation of the alchemist's own base soul into a perfected golden spirit. The hidden chemical processes were a metaphor for and a means to achieve inner purification and spiritual ascension. When we look at these illuminated texts today, we are therefore seeing two parallel manuscripts in one. There is the exoteric text, the surface story of kings and dragons that could be safely shown to any inquisitor. And then there is the esoteric text, the hidden manual of chemical operations and mystical philosophy, visible only to those who had learned to see the world as a vast, interconnected web of symbols. The alchemists didn't just want to conceal their knowledge, they wanted to embed it within the very structure of reality as they understood it, making their hidden messages a true key to the universe. Imagine a world where words themselves could summon gods, curse enemies, or cure diseases, a world where the right combination of sounds and symbols held tangible, terrifying power. This was the reality for many in the Greco-Roman world, a place where magic was not superstition but a practical science, and its most potent formulas were considered too dangerous to be left unguarded. We find the best evidence of this in a remarkable collection known as the Greek magical papyri, a cache of ancient handbooks that serve as our most direct window into the secretive world of ancient spellcraft. These weren't dusty scrolls for academic study, they were working manuals for practicing magicians, and they are filled with messages hidden in plain sight, not to confuse historians, but to protect the living from forces they believed were all too real. Discovered in Egypt, likely near the ancient city of Thebes, the papyri are believed to have been buried in a magician's tomb sometime in the 3rd or 4th century AD, possibly to conceal them from the rising influence of Christianity. Their contents are a fascinating cultural fusion, blending Egyptian deity names with Greek invocations, Jewish angelology, and even snippets of what seems to be garbled Babylonian. This syncretism itself is a form of code. By combining the most powerful sounding elements from multiple traditions, the magician was attempting to create a universal key to the divine, a super language of power that could compel any spirit to listen. The hidden message in this blending is one of pragmatism and a deep, cross-cultural search for efficacy in the supernatural, but the real encryption goes much deeper. Scattered throughout the recipes for love potions, curses, and divinations are strings of what appear to be pure nonsense words: ablanathanalba, sesenjanbar pharynges, acromachimary. These are voces magicae, magical words. To the uninitiated, they are meaningless gibberish, but scholars believe they served several crucial hidden functions. Some are likely palindromes like ablanathanalba, which reads the same forwards and backwards, a symmetry that was believed to contain inherent power and create a perfect, unbreakable magical circuit. Others are thought to be extreme corruptions or anagrams of sacred names from various languages, deliberately mangled to hide their true origin from casual users and to increase their mystical aura. By making the words obscure, the magician was not just protecting a secret, they were enhancing the spell's potency, believing that the mystery itself was a source of power that would impress and compel the gods or demons being invoked. Alongside these words, the papyri are filled with complex symbols known as characters. These are not simple drawings, they are intricate, often angular designs that look like a fusion of asterisks, unusual alphabetic characters, and schematic diagrams of celestial objects. They were meant to be drawn on papyrus, engraved on metal lamellae, or even carved into the skin of the practitioner. Each symbol was a concentrated package of meaning, a direct line to a specific divine force. The hidden message here is visual and symbolic. A single, unique character could stand in for a long and complicated invocation, acting as a kind of spiritual shorthand or a direct dial number to a particular deity. Their complexity also served as a barrier. Correctly drawing these symbols required training and precision. A single misplaced line could supposedly render the entire operation void or even dangerous, ensuring that the magic remained in the hands of a skilled professional. The instructions for the spells themselves are encoded in a different way, through ritual requirements that are as much about psychology as they are about the supernatural. A spell to gain a supernatural assistant or perdros might demand that the magician abstain from certain foods for weeks, gather rare ingredients at specific phases of the moon, and inscribe formulas on a particular metal alloy. These arduous requirements are a form of natural encryption. They ensure that only the most dedicated, wealthy, and resourceful individual could ever hope to perform the ritual correctly. This weeded out the dabblers and the desperate, protecting the secrets from misuse, and just as importantly, building within the magician himself the intense focus and altered state of consciousness necessary to believe the spell would work. The true magic might have been happening inside the practitioner's mind, and the complex recipe was the key to unlocking that psychological state. Perhaps the most poignant hidden message in the Greek magical papyri is not one of power but of shared human longing. Behind the fearsome invocations and bizarre symbols, we find the same hopes and fears that define us today. There are spells to heal a sick child, to attract a beloved, to succeed in business, and to find protection from enemies. The encryption was necessary because the desires were so raw and personal. To write a curse against a rival was a dangerous act that could backlash spiritually or legally if discovered. Encoding it in a string of voces magici provided a layer of deniability and spiritual safety. These papyri show us that the ancient world was not so different from our own, a place where people sought control over an unpredictable world through whatever means they believed might work, guarding their most potent methods with a secrecy born of both reverence and fear. Far from the sun-scorched sands where the Greek magical papyri were concealed, a different kind of hidden message was being carved into the very bones of the north. Across Scandinavia, standing stones still bear the runic inscriptions of the Vikings, often remembered as simple memorials. But look closer, and you'll find that many of these rune stones are far more than just gravestones. They are complex puzzles, boasting coded messages that were designed to be read only by those with the knowledge to see through the veil. The Vikings were master navigators of both seas and secrets, and they used their unique writing system, the Futhark, to encrypt everything from bragging rights about epic voyages to dangerous curses meant for a single pair of eyes. The most common form of encryption was the cipher rune. Instead of writing a rune directly, the carver would represent it through a numerical code based on its position within the runic alphabet, which was divided into 3 groups or eats. For instance, the rune Tiwaz, which looks like a single upward arrow, is the first rune of the 3rd eat. A common cipher would represent it not with its shape, but with a notation meaning the 3rd eat first rune. This might be carved as 3 parallel lines crossed by a single line. To the uninitiated, it looked like mere decoration or a stonemason's mark, but to someone who knew the system, it was a clear instruction on how to find the correct letter. This wasn't a code designed for national security. It was a test of intellect and belonging, a way for the carver to demonstrate their sophistication and ensure their message was only understood by fellow members of the literate elite, whether they were fellow merchants, warriors, or rune masters. Some messages were hidden using more creative methods, like the branch rune or twig cipher. In this system, the main vertical stave of a rune would remain, but the branching marks that normally distinguish one rune from another would be shifted to the left or right side of the stave to indicate which eat the rune belonged to. The number of branches would then indicate its specific position within that eat. Decoding this requires the reader to mentally reconstruct the rune's standard form based on this branching code. It transforms the act of reading into an active process of decryption, forcing the reader to participate in the unveiling of the message. This method turns a simple proclamation into an interactive intellectual game between the carver and the reader. One of the most famous examples of a hidden message is found on the Rune Stone in Sweden, a monument so densely covered in text that it has been called the world's longest runic inscription. While much of its text is in standard runes, it is essentially a giant riddle, filled with allusions to Norse mythology and heroic legends that would have been incomprehensible to an outsider. The stone commemorates a dead son, but it does so by recounting 9 enigmatic questions about the deeds of Theodoric the Great and the killing of a giant. Scholars believe this was not just a display of erudition. The mythological references may have been a coded way to discuss contemporary political events or power struggles that were too dangerous to state openly. The hidden message was a form of political speech, using the ancient stories as a safe allegory for modern conflicts. Beyond showing off or discussing politics, runes were also believed to hold inherent magical power. Inscriptions could be curses or spells, and hiding them within a cipher amplified their potency and protected them from being accidentally activated or diffused by the wrong person. A curse meant to bring illness to an enemy or to protect a grave from desecration would be all the more effective if its true meaning was concealed within a layer of encryption, known only to the gods and the rune master who cast it. The act of encoding was in itself a ritual that charged the words with greater mystical energy. The message's power was derived from its secrecy. Deciphering these stones today is a collaborative effort between linguists, historians, and archaeologists. The process often begins with a simple recognition of the cipher system being used. Once a section of code is identified, scholars apply their knowledge of the runic alphabet structure to translate the runes into their standard forms. From there, they must wrestle with the Old Norse language, which is filled with poetic kennings, metaphorical compound phrases. A wave steed is a ship, a corpse sea is blood, and the goddess of the needle is a woman. Understanding these metaphors is crucial to grasping the full meaning of a decoded message. It's a multi-layered puzzle. First, break the numerical or symbolic cipher, then translate the language, and finally interpret the rich, elusive poetry to uncover the stone's true story of loss, triumph, or mystical intent. The hidden messages of the Viking Rune Stones ultimately reveal a culture that valued wisdom, wordplay, and the power of the written word as much as it valued strength and exploration. These were not mindless barbarians. They were people who took great pride in crafting intricate messages that would challenge and impress their peers for generations. Each coded inscription is a testament to an individual's desire to be remembered not just for what they did, but for their cleverness in how they chose to record it. They carved their secrets in stone, trusting that the future would hold someone smart enough to listen. Moving from the cryptic ciphers of the Vikings, we venture into the sun-baked silence of an Egyptian tomb, where the very walls are alive with a chorus of voices, some singing praises to the gods, while others whisper dangerous truths only for the initiated. We often imagine hieroglyphs as a straightforward, monumental script chiseled to proclaim the glory of the pharaohs for all eternity. But this is only the exoteric story, the public broadcast. For those who knew how to listen, these inscriptions held a deeper, hidden layer of meaning, a secret dialogue woven from puns, homophones, and symbols that could subtly critique authority or convey esoteric knowledge far beyond the understanding of the common laborer who built these sacred spaces. This practice of encoding meaning stems from the very nature of the Egyptian language itself. Hieroglyphs are a complex system where a single symbol can function in 3 distinct ways: as an ideogram representing the object it depicts, as a phonogram representing a sound or series of sounds, and as a determinative, a silent symbol placed at the end of a word to clarify its meaning. This inherent flexibility created a perfect playground for double meanings. A scribe, often a high-ranking priest with immense theological and political knowledge, could craft a text that praised a pharaoh's divinity on the surface while using the same phonetic components to allude to a mythological story that carried a veiled warning or an alternative interpretation of the ruler's actions. The message was not hidden in a separate code, but embedded within the official proclamation itself, a stunning act of intellectual daring. We see this masterfully employed in the way gods and pharaohs were depicted. Take the god Set, the deity of chaos, storms, and violence, who murdered his brother Osiris. While publicly reviled, Set was also a powerful force revered as the protector of the solar bark, the one who defended the sun god Ra from the serpent Apophis each night. A text might describe a pharaoh's fury in battle by comparing him to Set. On the surface, this is high praise for the king's formidable power. But for a priest reading the same inscription, the reference to Set would also invoke the god's chaotic, fratricidal nature, potentially casting a shadow of moral ambiguity over the pharaoh's actions. The hieroglyph for Set, the mysterious animal known as the Set animal, thus becomes a loaded symbol, its meaning entirely dependent on the reader's level of initiation and the subtle context of the surrounding text. The use of homophones, words that sound the same but have different meanings, was another powerful tool for this esoteric communication. The Egyptian word for beautiful or perfect was Nefer. This sound could also be written with the hieroglyph of a heart and windpipe, which itself could symbolize something very different, the concept of to be angry or to be violent, stemming from the physical sensation of anger in the chest. A text might describe a pharaoh's reign as Nefer, meaning perfect, but a dissenting scribe could choose to write that word using the heart glyph, allowing for a subversive, whispered reading among initiates that the reign was actually one of anger or violence. The public celebration and the private critique existed within the same carved symbol, a silent protest preserved in stone for millennia. Perhaps the most profound hidden messages were those concerning the nature of the soul and the afterlife, knowledge reserved for the priesthood. The famous weighing of the heart ceremony from the Book of the Dead is a public-facing metaphor for judgment, but deeper esoteric texts like the Amjuat found in the tombs of the Valley of the Kings describe the sun god Ra's perilous journey through the 12 hours of the night. This was not just a story, it was a complex allegory for the soul's transformation after death. The various gods and demons Ra encounters represent internal psychological states and spiritual challenges the deceased must overcome. The uninitiated would see a thrilling adventure story, but the trained priest understood it as a detailed map of consciousness, a guide to navigating the realms of the psyche using meditation and ritual to achieve enlightenment, a hidden message of spiritual technology disguised as mythology. This tradition of layered meaning reflects the immense power and precarious position of the ancient Egyptian priesthood. They were the keepers of a vast body of knowledge spanning astronomy, medicine, theology, and statecraft. WHILE Chinese letter PHRROH's most important advisors. They also had to navigate the turbulent waters of court politics. Encoding subtle critiques or alternative narratives within official monuments was a way to maintain a historical record that was not entirely controlled by the crown, a way to speak truth to power without risking immediate execution. It was the ultimate act of intellectual preservation, ensuring that their sophisticated understanding of the world and their nuanced judgments of it would survive not in secret scrolls, but in the most public and permanent places imaginable, hidden in the brilliant light of the inscribed wall for all to see, yet for only a few to truly understand. But to truly understand the depth of this hidden language, we must step into the shoes of a Renaissance patron. This was not a public art in the modern sense. These paintings were created for specific private settings, the studies of wealthy merchants, the chapels of powerful families, the villas of enlightened nobles. The audience was small, educated, and expected to engage in a sophisticated intellectual game. The painter's skill was not just in rendering a beautiful face, but in weaving a complex tapestry of meaning that would reward sustained contemplation and reveal the patron's erudition, piety, or political allegiance. The surface narrative was a gift to the casual observer, but the hidden symbols were the real treasure reserved for those in the know. Perhaps no artist embodies this dual-layered approach more perfectly than Sandro Botticelli. His iconic Primavera is a feast for the eyes, a seemingly joyous celebration of spring with graceful figures in a flowery grove. But to the Medici circle in Florence for whom it was painted, this was a dense philosophical manifesto. At its heart is Venus, the goddess of love, but she is depicted not as a pagan deity but as a symbol of humanitas, refined, intellectual love. To her right, the three graces don't just dance, they represent the Medici ideals of liberality, beauty, and chastity. Most startling is the figure of Mercury on the far left. He uses his caduceus staff to dispel a small, grey cloud. This isn't just a weather phenomenon. For a viewer steeped in Neoplatonic thought, this cloud represents ignorance. Mercury, a symbol of reason and wisdom, is literally clearing the clouds of mindless thought, a direct reference to the Medici's view of themselves as enlightened bringers of a new intellectual springtime to Florence. The painting is a political statement declaring the Medici not just as rulers but as the philosophical guides of the Republic. Leonardo da Vinci, the ultimate Renaissance polymath, took this practice to its most enigmatic level. His Last Supper in Milan is more than a biblical scene. It is a masterpiece of psychological and symbolic tension. Every element, from the spilled salt near Judas's elbow to the precise gestures of the apostles, is loaded with meaning. But the hidden messages extend beyond the table. The architectural space itself is a clue. The three windows behind Christ do not just illuminate him, they symbolize the Holy Trinity. The pediment above his head forms an aureole, a subtle architectural halo. Even the food on the table is symbolic. The fish, a centuries-old code for Christ, is prominently placed. Da Vinci uses the entire composition to reinforce theological concepts, creating a layered reading experience where the architecture and the objects are as communicative as the figures themselves. This language of symbols was not limited to grand mythological or religious scenes. It often found its most personal and dangerous expression in portraiture. In Hans Holbein, the Youngers, the ambassadors, two wealthy and powerful men stand surrounded by objects showcasing their worldly knowledge and success: globes, astrolabes, musical instruments, books. This is the public face of Renaissance man, learned, cosmopolitan, and in control. But slicing diagonally across the foreground is an enormous, distorted shape that resolves into a human skull only when viewed from a specific, extreme angle. This anamorphic memento mori, a reminder of death, is the ultimate hidden message. It subverts the entire painting, whispering that all this learning, power, and wealth are ultimately fleeting in the face of mortality. It was a daring and deeply personal statement about the vanity of worldly pursuits, hidden in plain sight for a viewer willing to change their perspective to see the truth. The stakes for this kind of symbolic communication could be incredibly high, especially when it touched on matters of faith and politics. During the turbulent years of the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, artists often had to navigate dangerous ideological waters. A painting that seemed orthodox to a censor might contain subtle symbols appealing to a persecuted minority. A carefully placed iris could symbolize the Passion of Christ for most, but for those aware of its other meaning, it could represent the Virgin Mary, emphasizing her role in a way that was becoming controversial in Protestant regions. These visual codes became a lifeline, a way to maintain faith and identity under the watchful eyes of authorities. The brushstroke became as potent and discreet as a whispered word in a crowded room, carrying messages of defiance, comfort, and solidarity to those trained to see them. While the art of concealment in Renaissance Europe often served the powerful and the elite, an entire tradition of open yet encrypted communication was flourishing across the Atlantic. born from diplomacy and a profound respect for collective memory. In the forests and coastal regions of northeastern North America, indigenous nations like the Haudenosaunee and the Wampanoag developed a sophisticated and beautiful system for recording their most vital agreements and stories. They did not use paper or parchment, but instead crafted intricate belts from polished shells, weaving together history, law, and promise with every bead. These are the wampum belts, and their hidden messages were not meant to be permanently obscure, but to serve as a living, tangible archive for those who knew how to read their coded patterns. The very material of wampum held deep significance. The beads were meticulously hand-ground from the inner spiral of the quahog clam, which produced a sacred purple-black color, and from the inner column of the whelk shell, which yielded a pure white. These were not mere decorations. In many Eastern woodlands cultures, shell was deeply associated with the water of life and was considered a potent spiritual medium. The process of creating the beads was incredibly labor-intensive, requiring great skill and patience. This inherent value, both spiritual and physical, made wampum the perfect medium for recording matters of utmost importance. A belt's worth was measured not in currency, but in the gravity of the message it carried and the commitment of the people who created it. To call these designs simply patterns is to miss their genius. The wampum belt was a mnemonic device, a memory aid woven in shell. The arrangement of purple and white beads into specific symbols, lines, and figures was a code that triggered the recall of a detailed oral narrative. A trained speaker or wampum keeper would hold the belt and by reading its imagery would be able to recite the entire treaty, historical event, or law it represented verbatim. The belt itself did not contain the full text, it contained the key. For example, a belt recording a treaty of peace might feature two figures holding hands, represented by a line of purple beads against a white background. To the keeper, this image would prompt the recitation of the exact terms of the agreement, the names of the signatory nations, and the promises made. The hidden message was in the symbology, a visual language understood by the initiated. This system reached its most sophisticated form with the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy, a powerful alliance of 5 and later 6 nations. Their legendary Great Law of Peace, a complex constitutional document outlining governance and social order, was recorded in a series of wampum belts. The most famous is the Hiawatha belt, named after one of the founders of the Confederacy. Its design is deceptively simple, 5 symbols connected by a central line. To a Haudenosaunee speaker, this belt is a dense political map. Each symbol represents one of the founding nations, the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk, and their specific placement relative to the central, tree-like symbol of the Onondaga, who served as the firekeepers, encodes their relationship and responsibilities within the League. This single belt is a complete diagram of a nation's soul, a hidden message of unity and identity woven in shell. When European colonists arrived, they were quick to recognize the diplomatic power of wampum. They entered into a cross-cultural communication system where these belts were the legally binding documents. The famous 2-row wampum belt, or guswenta, offered by the Haudenosaunee to the Dutch in the early 1600s, perfectly illustrates this. Its design features 2 parallel rows of purple beads on a white background. These 2 rows represent a native canoe and a European ship, traveling the river of life together side by side. The 3 rows of white beads between them symbolize the core principles of the treaty: peace, friendship, and respect. The hidden message within this elegant design is a powerful political philosophy. The 2 cultures would coexist in perpetuity, but neither would attempt to steer the other's vessel. They would not interfere in each other's laws, customs, or ways of life. It was a message of sovereign coexistence, a concept the colonists verbally agreed to, but would ultimately fail to understand and uphold. The fragility of this cross-cultural understanding highlights the poignancy of the wampum tradition. Many belts were lost, destroyed, or simply stored away in museum drawers by colonists who saw them as quaint relics or trophies, divorced from the living oral tradition that gave them meaning. Without the wampum keepers, the human libraries who could interpret the codes, the belts fell silent. Their messages became truly hidden, their stories dormant. A belt signifying a solemn promise might end up in a glass case, its intricate pattern admired for its artistry, while its profound diplomatic plea for mutual respect went unread. Yet the tradition was not extinguished. Today, there is a powerful movement within many native communities to reclaim these belts and, more importantly, to revitalize the knowledge of how to read them. Elders and knowledge keepers are painstakingly working to reconnect the visual patterns with the oral histories that have been preserved through generations. This is not an archaeological exercise, it is an act of cultural resurrection. Each belt that is properly understood is a treaty reminder, a historical record, and a law that is brought back to life. The hidden messages are being unlocked not with a cryptographic key, but through the patient work of reclaiming language, ceremony, and memory. The wampum belts are speaking again, and they carry messages about law, respect, and history that are as critically relevant today as they were centuries ago. Imagine a medieval monastery, a quiet scriptorium where the only sound is the scratching of a quill on parchment. Parchment made from the skin of calves, sheep, or goats was an incredibly expensive commodity. In an age before the printing press, if a book fell out of fashion or was deemed theologically obsolete, its materials were far too valuable to waste. The solution was both practical and, from our modern perspective, heartbreaking. Scribes would take an older book, gently scrape or wash the original ink from the pages, and then write a brand new text on the newly cleaned surface. This recycled manuscript is known as a palimpsest, from the Greek words palin for again and sestos for scraped. To the naked eye, these books revealed only their most recent message. But just beneath the surface, hiding in the faintest of scars and stains, were the ghosts of the texts that had been erased, often containing lost treasures of classical knowledge. The reasons for this literary recycling are a dark map of history's shifting priorities. The most common cause was the triumph of Christianity across Europe and the Near East. As the new faith spread, the demand for Bibles, psalters, and liturgical texts skyrocketed. The old texts that were scrubbed away to make room for them were often the works of the pre-Christian world, the philosophy of the Greeks, the science of the Romans, the histories and plays that formed the backbone of classical learning. A 10th century monk needed vellum for a new copy of the Gospels. The fact that he was overwriting a rare copy of a Cicero speech or Archimedes' mathematical theories was of little consequence to him. In his eyes, he was replacing pagan thought with the sacred word of God. Other times, languages themselves fell out of use. In the Middle East, ancient Syriac translations of Greek classics were erased to make way for more relevant Arabic texts. Each palimpsest is a frozen moment in this cultural upheaval, where one worldview literally overwrote another. For centuries, these hidden layers remained a tantalizing secret. Scholars might notice a faint, backward script bleeding through the main text or see odd markings in the margins that didn't belong, but they had no way to recover the original writing. The true revolution in palimpsest studies began with the advent of modern imaging technology. Scientists now use a dazzling array of tools to peer back through time. Multispectral imaging is the most powerful among them. This process involves photographing a single page dozens of times, each time bathing it in a specific wavelength of light, from ultraviolet to infrared. The different inks, and even the chemical alterations in the parchment where ink once was, absorb and reflect this light in unique ways. Sophisticated computer algorithms then combine all these images, digitally peeling away the upper text to isolate and enhance the fainter, older script beneath. It's a form of archaeological excavation, but instead of dirt, researchers are carefully removing layers of light. The rewards of this digital digging have been nothing short of miraculous. One of the most famous palimpsests is the Archimedes palimpsest. This prayer book, written in the 13th century, was discovered in the 19th century to contain hidden mathematical treatises by the ancient Greek genius Archimedes, including the only known copy of his work, the Method. For over 100 years, scholars could only guess at its full contents, but through a multi-year project using multispectral imaging, the full text was finally revealed. This recovered work showed Archimedes' thought process in a way never seen before, employing concepts that foreshadowed calculus by nearly 2,000 years. This wasn't just the recovery of an old book, it was a massive leap in our understanding of the history of science. Other discoveries are equally profound. The Codex Zacynthius, a 13th century New Testament manuscript, was found to be written over an even older 6th or 7th century text containing a commentary on the Gospel of Luke. This hidden undertext is one of the earliest examples of a catena, or chain, of commentary linking together interpretations from various church fathers. Its recovery helps scholars understand how early Christians studied and interpreted their scriptures. In other palimpsests, researchers have found lost speeches by the Roman senator Cicero, which provide new insights into the politics of the late Roman Republic, and previously unknown poems by ancient Greek writers like Sappho, giving us more fragments of her famously sparse and powerful verse. Each recovered word from a palimpsest forces us to reconsider the so-called Dark Ages. They were not an era of uniform ignorance, they were a period of fierce contestation over knowledge. A monk meticulously scrubbing away a Greek scientific text to copy a theological treatise was making a conscious choice about what knowledge was valuable to preserve for his community. The fact that we can now recover the text he erased means we get to hear both sides of that ancient conversation. We witness the act of censorship, and then we reverse it, gaining a double perspective on history. These manuscripts are not just carriers of texts, they are artifacts of intellectual conflict, embodying the constant human struggle to decide what is worth remembering and what is best forgotten. The hidden messages they reveal are therefore more than just lost books. They are a second chance to listen to voices that were deliberately silenced, allowing us to reconstruct a richer, more complicated, and far more interesting past. While much of Europe was emerging from the so-called Dark Ages, a different artistic revolution was taking place on the other side of the world, one where storytelling wasn't just read but physically performed. In Japan, from the 8th century onward, a unique art form flourished, the emaki, or illustrated hand scroll. These were not books to be leafed through, but immersive narrative experiences designed to be enjoyed over time. An emaki scroll is a continuous length of paper or silk, sometimes stretching over 40 feet long, that combines painted scenes with sections of calligraphic text. To view it, you would sit at a low table and slowly unroll the scroll with your right hand while rolling it back up with your left, a few feet at a time. This method of consumption is the key to its hidden messages. The narrative unfolds literally and figuratively, controlling your pace, your focus, and the very drama of the tale being told. The scroll's design ensures you cannot see the ending prematurely. You are forced to journey through the story moment by moment, just as the creators intended. The true genius of the emaki lies in its mastery of visual pacing and psychological manipulation. Artists employed sophisticated techniques to guide the viewer's emotional journey. One of the most powerful was the use of continuous narrative, where the same characters appear multiple times within a single, unbroken landscape. You might see a nobleman leave his house on the far right of a scene, then encounter a mysterious figure further along the path, and finally arrive at a temple in the distance, all within one painted stretch. This technique creates a fluid sense of time and motion, pulling you along the narrative path. Another common device was the abrupt shift from a slow, text-heavy section to a sudden, explosive double-page illustration with no text at all. A moment of pure visual drama, like the sudden appearance of a terrifying demon or the chaotic scene of a great battle. These visual surprises were strategically placed to maximize impact, a hidden message about the rhythm of the story itself. Beyond pacing, the emaki format was perfect for embedding subtle moral and social commentary. A famous example is the 12th century Genji Monogatari emaki, which illustrates scenes from Lady Murasaki's monumental novel, The Tale of Genji. At first glance, it is a beautiful depiction of courtly life and romance. But the artists used a technique known as hikaime kajibana, drawn lines for eyes and a hook-shaped stroke for the nose, to create highly stylized, almost identical faces for the aristocracy. This wasn't a lack of skill, it was a deliberate hidden message. By rendering the nobility with uniform features, the artists emphasized their shared status and the rigid, performative nature of court life, where individual identity was often suppressed in favor of societal role and etiquette. The true story was not in the faces, but in the opulent surroundings, the subtle body language, and the stolen glances between lovers that the text describes. Perhaps the most direct use of the emaki for a hidden moral lesson is found in the Gaki Zoshi, or Scroll of the Hungry Ghosts. This unsettling work depicts the Buddhist realm of the Gaki, tormented spirits who are perpetually consumed by insatiable hunger and thirst as karmic punishment for past greed. The scroll begins by showing their miserable existence in a hellish landscape. But as you unroll it further, the narrative reveals the specific human sins that led to this fate. A wealthy man hoarding food while the poor starve outside his gate, a priest gorging himself on temple offerings meant for the Buddha. The terrifying images of the hungry ghosts are the consequence, the hidden message delivered visually. The scroll doesn't just tell a story, it serves as a brutal, unforgettable warning against avarice and selfishness, using the sequential format to first show the punishment and then reveal the sin that caused it, making the moral lesson utterly inescapable. The format also allowed for a unique form of political and historical storytelling. The Ban Dainagan Ekotoba, or the story of the Great Counselor Ban, depicts a complex historical incident involving arson, court intrigue, and a manipulated child witness. As you unroll the scroll, you are drawn into the chaos of a city fire, the frantic movements of the crowd, and the subtle gestures of the conspirators. The artist tells the story from a specific point of view, glorifying the eventual victor and vilifying the disgraced courtier Ban. The hidden message is one of political propaganda. The scroll was likely commissioned by the winning faction to legitimize their power and permanently cement their version of events in a visually compelling, authoritative format. The sequential nature forces the viewer to experience the truth of the narrative exactly as the patron intended, from the dramatic crime to the satisfying resolution. What makes the emaki so profoundly different from a Western painting or even a modern comic book is its inherent intimacy and required participation. You cannot be a passive observer. Your hands control the flow of time. You choose when to pause on a delicate detail, the pattern on a kimono, the expression of a minor character, and when to rush forward to see what happens next. This physical interaction creates a deeply personal connection to the narrative. The scroll reveals its secrets only through your active engagement, making you a collaborator in its storytelling. The greatest hidden message of the Japanese emaki is not in its pigments or its words, but in its design. It is an object that understands the power of time, suspense, and revelation, crafting an experience that is as captivating and immersive today as it was 1,000 years ago, a whispered story that only speaks to those willing to sit down and slowly, carefully unroll it. High in the mountains of Armenia, standing silently in ancient cemeteries and monastic complexes, are thousands of intricately carved stone sentinels known as kochkars. The word itself means cross stone, and each one is a unique masterpiece of devotion, a slab of volcanic tuff or basalt carved with an elaborate cross at its center, surrounded by a dense tapestry of rosettes, weaving patterns, grapevines, and other symbolic designs. For centuries, they were understood as profound expressions of faith, memorials to the dead, and monuments to significant historical events. But a compelling and controversial theory suggests these stones hold a much deeper secret, that their complex geometric patterns are not merely decorative, but a sophisticated code predicting the very tremors of the earth upon which they stand. This idea stems from a haunting observation. Armenia is a land acutely familiar with seismic violence, sitting upon a devastatingly active network of fault lines. The horrific Spitak earthquake of 1988 is a fresh wound in the national memory, a tragedy that killed tens of thousands. Yet, in the aftermath of such disasters, archaeologists and historians began to notice something astonishing. In villages that had been utterly leveled by modern tremors, the ancient khotchkars often remained standing, cracked but defiant amidst the rubble. This remarkable resilience couldn't be explained by material alone. The same volcanic tuff was used to build the houses that had collapsed. The difference, some researchers proposed, was in the carving. They began to wonder if the intricate network of patterns covering the stones, the very thing that made them beautiful, might also be a form of structural reinforcement, a kind of seismic damping system conceived by medieval artisans through centuries of hard-won experience with earthquakes. The theory posits that the master carvers of medieval Armenia were not just artists but empirical engineers. Through observation, they may have learned that a solid, monolithic slab of stone would shatter under intense vibrational stress. But a slab carved through with a complex, interlacing web of patterns transformed the stone. The deep grooves and intricate details could act as controlled fracture lines, dissipating and redirecting the energy of a quake throughout the entire structure, preventing a single, catastrophic break. The khotchkar, in this view, becomes a shock absorber, its beauty and its strength derived from the same purposeful design. The hidden message is one of survival, literally inscribed into the stone, a message that we are only now beginning to appreciate with our modern understanding of seismology and material science. But the mystery deepens from the physical into the prophetic. A more esoteric branch of this research examines the specific symbols themselves. Certain repetitive motifs, like the eternal wheel of eternity, intricate star shapes, and complex knotwork, are analyzed not just for their structural utility, but for their potential symbolic meaning. Could these patterns represent a map of seismic energy? Some researchers have overlaid the carvings from khotchkars in known seismic zones with modern geological survey maps and claim to see correlations. The density of lines in a particular section of the stone might correspond to the predicted intensity of tremors from a nearby fault line. The number of petals on a rosette or the repetitions of a specific geometric sequence might encode a cyclical understanding of earthquake recurrence intervals, a calendar of cataclysm written in stone. Naturally, this interpretation is met with significant skepticism from the mainstream academic community. Critics argue that connecting abstract medieval artistry to specific seismic predictions is a classic case of apophenia, the human tendency to see patterns and connections in random or meaningless data. They point out that the primary purpose of the khotchkars was unequivocally religious and memorial. The symbols are well documented within the context of Armenian Christian theology: the cross for salvation, the grapevines for the blood of Christ and the Eucharist, the rosettes for the watchful eyes of God, and the wheel of eternity for the everlasting soul. To assign them a secondary scientific purpose, the skeptics say, is a modern projection, an attempt to find comfort and order in the terrifying randomness of natural disasters by attributing advanced knowledge to our ancestors. Yet, even if one dismisses the idea of literal prediction, the cultural and spiritual dimension of protection remains powerfully potent. Whether by deliberate engineering or accidental byproduct of deep carving, the khotchkars did possess a physical resilience that saved them. For the medieval Armenian, this survival would not have been seen as a matter of physics, but as a miracle, tangible proof of the cross's divine power to protect and endure against all earthly chaos. The hidden message, then, is layered. On one level, it is a practical, if intuitive, application of seismic dampening. On a deeper, more profound level, it is a spiritual statement that faith, carved deeply and intricately into the very fabric of one's world, provides the ultimate reinforcement against the tremors of fate. The Kochkar stands as a dual monument to both earthly ingenuity and heavenly hope, a silent witness that has weathered centuries of storms, both geological and historical, continuing to guard its secrets in the quiet Armenian highlands. In the stark, silent expanse of the Egyptian desert near the town of Nag Hammadi, a moment of pure chance in 1945 would rip open a seam in history, revealing a hidden spiritual world that the official church had tried for centuries to erase. It was there that a local farmer digging for fertile soil struck not dirt, but the curved lip of a large, sealed jar buried beneath the sands. Inside was not gold or treasure as he might have hoped, but 13 leather-bound codices, books filled with papyrus pages. Initially disappointed, he had no idea he had just unearthed the most significant collection of lost Christian scripture ever discovered. A library of alternative gospels and radical spiritual teachings that would force a complete re-evaluation of Christianity's tumultuous first few centuries. These texts, now known as the Nag Hammadi Library, are written in Coptic, the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language, but they are translations of even earlier Greek originals. They represent the sacred literature of various Gnostic sects, groups of early Christians who were ultimately branded as heretics and violently suppressed by the emerging Orthodox Church. The hidden message in their very existence is one of survival against all odds. Someone, likely a monk from a nearby monastery fearing persecution, made the conscious decision to bury this library around the 4th century AD, saving these controversial writings from being burned and lost forever. They were a time capsule of forbidden knowledge intended for a future generation they hoped would be more ready to receive their message. So what made these texts so dangerous? Their core message presented a radically different path to salvation than the one being formalized by the church authorities in Rome and Alexandria. While the Orthodox view emphasized faith in the historical Jesus, his sacrificial death, and resurrection as the sole means to redemption, the Gnostic Gospels found at Nag Hammadi proposed that salvation was not about belief, but about a special kind of knowledge gnosis. This wasn't intellectual knowledge or book learning. It was an intuitive, self-actualizing knowledge of the divine spark within oneself. The ultimate hidden message of these texts is that heaven is not a distant place you earn through belief, but a state of awakened consciousness you can achieve through spiritual seeking and self-discovery. This philosophy is laid out most famously in the Gospel of Thomas, which opens with a stunning claim. It begins, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded." Unlike the canonical Gospels that narrate the story of Jesus' life, death, and miracles, the Gospel of Thomas is simply a list of 114 cryptic sayings and parables. Many are familiar, echoing versions found in Matthew and Luke, but others are utterly unique and deeply challenging. Saying 70 reads, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This is the heart of the Gnostic hidden message. The divine is not an external patriarch to be worshipped, but an internal reality to be realized and unleashed. The kingdom of God is within you, and it is yours to discover. Other texts in the collection offer even more mind-bending alternatives to the standard Christian narrative. The Gospel of Philip critiques a literal interpretation of the resurrection, instead framing it as a spiritual metaphor, stating, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. They must receive the resurrection while they live." The Apocryphon of John presents an elaborate creation myth where the material world is not the perfect creation of a sole benevolent God, but the flawed work of a lesser, arrogant being called the Demiurge, who ignorantly believes he is the ultimate deity. Humanity's plight is one of divine amnesia, trapped in a material prison, and the Christ figure's role is that of a revealer, come to awaken us to our true, luminous origin beyond this flawed cosmos. For the early church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian, who were building a unified, hierarchical religion capable of surviving the Roman Empire, these ideas were anathema. They promoted a spirituality that was individualistic, experiential, and potentially elitist, available only to those who had the capacity for this inner awakening. This threatened the very structure of a church built on ordained priests, standardized sacraments, and universal creeds. The hidden messages of the Nag Hammadi library were therefore not just theological differences, they were a direct challenge to institutional power. The Orthodox Church's response was to declare them heretical, systematically seek out and destroy them, and eventually canonize the 27 books of the New Testament we know today, creating a single, authorized story of Jesus. The rediscovery of these texts in the 20th century was nothing short of revolutionary for scholars. It proved that early Christianity was not a monolithic faith that sprang fully formed from the apostles. Instead, it was an incredibly diverse and fiercely competitive marketplace of ideas, with numerous groups: Jewish Christians, Pauline Christians, Gnostics, and others, all claiming to be the true inheritors of Jesus' message. The Nag Hammadi library gives a voice to the losers of that theological battle, allowing us to hear a version of Christianity that was almost completely erased from history. Their hidden messages, once deemed heretical, now offer a fascinating glimpse into the roads not taken, revealing an ancient form of spirituality that emphasizes personal enlightenment, inner discovery, and the profound idea that the divine is a mystery to be explored within, not just a doctrine to be obeyed. Imagine the most opulent court of the 16th century, where the air is thick with the scent of incense and the sound of a lute. A poet stands before the Sultan, reciting verses that seem to speak only of a beautiful beloved, her coy smile, her cruel indifference, the poet's own unbearable longing. To the untrained ear, it is a beautiful, if conventional, love song, but to the inner circle of the Ottoman elite, the message is something else entirely. This is the art of divan poetry, a centuries-old tradition where the surface is a veil, and the truth lies shimmering beneath, accessible only to those who hold the key to its intricate code. The language of this poetry was a world apart from everyday Turkish. It was a dense, highly stylized literary language steeped in Persian and Arabic vocabulary and governed by complex metrical rules. This linguistic barrier was the first layer of encryption. Mastery of this form was a mark of elite education and status, a prerequisite for anyone in the upper echelons of the imperial court, the military, or the religious establishment. When a poet composed, they were speaking directly to this rarefied audience, using a shared lexicon of symbols that transformed a love poem into a sophisticated conversation about power, faith, and philosophy. The beauty was the bait, but the hidden meaning was the hook. At the heart of this symbolic language was the central metaphor of the beloved. On one level, yes, she could be a human object of desire. But more often, she was a multifaceted symbol. For the Sufi mystic, the beloved's beauty was a reflection of the divine, her cruelty the necessary pain of spiritual separation from God, and the poet's longing the soul's yearning for reunification with the source of all creation. The tavern mentioned in so many poems was not a place of sin but a Sufi lodge. The wine was not alcohol but the intoxicating knowledge of God. A single couplet could thus be a detailed map of a mystical journey, disguised as a lament for a lost love. Simultaneously, in the political sphere, the beloved could represent the Sultan himself. The poet's devotion and the beloved's fickleness then became a nuanced commentary on the relationship between a courtier and his capricious ruler. A line about waiting endlessly at the beloved's door could be a poignant reference to seeking an audience at the palace. A complaint about the beloved's coldness might be a carefully veiled critique of the Sultan's failure to provide patronage or his unjust behavior. This allowed a clever poet to flatter, advise, or even chastise the most powerful man in the empire without ever uttering a direct word of criticism, a vital survival skill in a world where a misspoken phrase could lead to exile or death. The system extended to social criticism as well. Poets used the established imagery to comment on the issues of their day. The figure of the rival, often portrayed as an uncouth, gossiping enemy who wooed the beloved with false promises, could be a stand-in for corrupt officials or political opponents. The false ascetic, or the hypocritical preacher, was a common trope used to lampoon religious figures who preached piety but lived in greed. This layered approach provided a safe outlet for dissent, allowing poets to articulate the anxieties and frustrations of their class under the protective cover of a universally admired artistic tradition. The genius of divan poetry lies in its refusal to be pinned to a single interpretation. A poem by the 16th century master Bacchi can be read and appreciated for its breathtaking imagery and musicality alone. But for the initiated, that same poem resonates on 3 or 4 different levels at once: personal, mystical, political. It is a testament to the intellectual sophistication of Ottoman court culture, where art was not merely decoration but a vital, dynamic, and dangerously subtle form of communication. These were not just poems, they were complex psychological and political instruments, their true messages hidden in the brilliant light of their own beauty, waiting centuries for a wider audience to learn how to listen. High in the peaks of the Andes, where the air is thin and history feels close enough to touch, the Inca Empire managed one of the largest and most organized civilizations the world has ever known, all without a single system of writing as we traditionally understand it. They had no alphabet, no parchment scrolls, no carved stelae covered in glyphs. Instead, their entire administrative, historical, and perhaps even literary world was recorded on a mesmerizing and enigmatic device, the quipu. From the Quechua word for knot, a quipu is a collection of colorful cotton or camelid fiber cords suspended from a primary strand with a dizzying array of knots tied into them. To the Spanish conquistadors who encountered them in the 16th century, these objects were incomprehensible, little more than primitive mnemonic toys. They failed to see that they were holding the central nervous system of an empire, a complex data storage device whose hidden messages we are only now beginning to hear. A quipu's language is three-dimensional, built from a sophisticated combination of variables that a trained recorder, known as a quipukamayok, could read by touch as well as by sight. The primary medium was number. The Incas used a base 10 positional system much like our own. The position of a knot on its string indicated its place value units: tens, hundreds, thousands. The type of knot indicated the digit itself. A figure 8 knot represented the number 1. A long knot with multiple turns could represent the numbers 2 through 9, with the number of turns corresponding to the value. A single overhand knot or a space left empty signified 0, a concept the Inca understood and utilized centuries before it became common in Europe. This system allowed them to record vast quantities of data with incredible efficiency, tracking everything from tributes paid in corn and potatoes to the precise number of llamas in a provincial herd, the size of an army, or a census of an entire region. But the data was far more than just numerical. The physicality of each chord carried its own layer of meaning. The color of the string was absolutely crucial. A brown chord might represent a potato, while a white one could signify silver. A specific sequence of colors could denote a particular region or ethnic group within the empire. The spin and ply of the chord, whether it was spun to the right or the left, could invert or modify the meaning of the number it held. Even the direction in which the knots were tied, facing toward or away from the main strand, is thought to have added another binary layer of information, perhaps marking something as a credit or a debit, a gain or a loss. This multi-sensory system transformed a simple bundle of strings into a dense, hyper-efficient database. a physical spreadsheet that could be rolled up and transported by a runner along the Inca's vast network of roads. For generations, scholars were confident that quippus were purely numerical and logistical tools, administrative ledgers for running a state. The true revolution and the most tantalizing hidden message emerged from a handful of rare quippus that simply did not fit this model. These specimens, often from remote villages that had maintained their traditions in secret long after the fall of the empire, displayed a radical departure. Their knots did not follow the logical, positional patterns of accounting. Instead, they featured complex, almost chaotic arrangements of knots, with 8 identical knots in a row, or alternating sequences that made no numerical sense whatsoever. This discovery cracked the door open to a breathtaking possibility that some quippus, often called narrative quippus, were not recording numbers but stories. They were encoding a form of writing. The quest to decipher this narrative code is one of the great detective stories of modern archaeology. Researchers like Harvard's Gary Urton have pioneered a radical approach, creating a massive digital repository to catalog every known quippu in the world, analyzing over 800 variables for each one, from chord color and spin to knot direction and exact position. The goal is to find patterns, a grammatical structure hidden within the knots. The most promising lead comes from the work of Peruvian anthropologist Sabine Heil, who studied quippus still in use by elders in the village of San Juan de Calata. The community elders told her these were not accounting tools, but epistolary quippus narrative messages sent between chiefs during an 18th century rebellion. Crucially, they explained that the colors of the strings were not arbitrary. They represented specific syllables from a lost ancestral language. The fibers themselves held meaning: vicuña wool for the sacred, alpaca for leadership, and deer for the missive itself. In this system, a quippu could literally be read aloud, its knots and colors forming phonetic syllables that constructed words and sentences. This suggests the quippu system may have been a semasiographic script, much like computer code or musical notation, where signs convey meaning directly without representing a specific sound. A specific combination of knot, color, and material might not spell out the word llama phonetically, but would instead be a direct symbol for a llama or for the concept of herding. This would make it a truly unique writing system, one that operates in a completely different dimension from sound-based alphabets. The hidden messages of these narrative quippus could therefore be the lost histories, poems, and genealogies of the Inca, a rich literary tradition that we have only just learned existed, preserved not in ink but in fiber, waiting for the right hands to trace their stories and finally listen to what they have to say. Moving from the knotted narratives of the Andes, we journey into the hushed, hallowed spaces of the medieval monastery and apothecary, where the line between medicine, magic, and malice was often blurred on the page. In an age where knowledge was power and certain knowledge was dangerously heretical, some of the most potent secrets were hidden not in complex ciphers, but in the beautiful, deceptive pages of illuminated herbal manuscripts. These books, known as herbals, were practical guides to the natural world, cataloging plants, their appearances, and their purported uses for healing. But within their lush illustrations and seemingly straightforward descriptions, a clever compiler could conceal far more dangerous knowledge: formulas for poisons, rituals for summoning spirits, or radical medical theories that challenged the Church's doctrines, all protected through a sophisticated language of visual misdirection and symbolic coding. The most straightforward form of concealment was the practice of intentional error. A scribe or monastic healer under scrutiny could protect a potent recipe by slightly altering a crucial ingredient in the public-facing text. The herbal might describe a common, benign plant like parsley or thyme in the accompanying illustration, but the text would quietly note that for a certain powerful remedy, one should seek out the moon thyme or devil's ear instead. These were not real plants, but coded names known only within a specific circle of practitioners. To an inquisitor or a rival, the recipe would appear useless or nonsensical, a sign of ignorant superstition. But to an initiated apprentice, it was a clear instruction to use a highly toxic or restricted substance like monkshood or belladonna, whose real name and image were deliberately omitted from the book to avoid suspicion. The hidden message was one of trust. You had to already know the truth to access the knowledge. The illustrations themselves could be masterclasses in steganography. In a famously controversial section of the Tacuanum Sanatotes, a medieval handbook on wellness, a depiction of a woman harvesting mandrake roots shows the plant with human-like features, a common mythological trope. But look closer at the background of such images, and you might find a dog tied to the plant, a detail referencing the ancient belief that the mandrake's scream when uprooted could kill a person, so a dog was used to pull it from the ground. This wasn't just whimsy, it was a critical, practical safety instruction embedded within the artwork. For those who understood the symbol, the image communicated the correct and dangerous procedure for harvesting a powerful narcotic without writing a single incriminating word. The picture itself was the encoded recipe. Beyond practical concealment, these manuscripts could also serve as covert repositories for pre-Christian folk magic and pagan belief systems that were being systematically erased by the Church. A beautiful painting of St. John's wort, a plant associated with driving out evil spirits, might be accompanied by a text praising its use in Christian exorcisms. However, the specific instructions for its harvest only at midnight on the summer solstice while facing east were pure pagan ritual, preserving the ancient timing and ceremonial practice within a newly Christianized context. The herbal provided a safe conduit, allowing old magical knowledge to be transmitted under the acceptable guise of pious herbalism. The hidden message was one of cultural survival, a way to keep the old gods alive under the names of new saints. Perhaps the most profound hidden messages were not about poison or magic, but about alternative models of the body and the natural world that challenged Aristotelian and Galenic teachings sanctioned by the Church. A radical healer might encode their belief in a proto-chemical understanding of medicine by using alchemical symbols within the herbal. A series of recipes calling for the quicksilver essence of a plant or instructing the use of a sealed vessel of green glass were not just flowery language, they were directions for distillation and alchemical processes that pointed toward a different, more experimental science. By framing these advanced techniques within the familiar format of a plant book, the author could safeguard a nascent scientific worldview from accusations of heresy, slowly planting the seeds of a chemical revolution in the fertile soil of an illustrated garden. The very act of creating these books was a form of encryption. The cost of vellum, pigments, and the immense time required for illumination meant that herbals were precious objects owned by the wealthy and powerful, often monasteries, nobles, or royalty. Their creation was therefore subject to the biases and fears of their patrons. An artist might add a perfectly rendered but entirely fictional unicorn horn to the margin of a page depicting antidotes, knowing it would please a patron who believed in its purifying properties. This deliberate inclusion of fantasy alongside fact created a layer of noise, obscuring the true, effective remedies within a cloud of fashionable superstition. The book's own opulence could be its best disguise, its beauty distracting from its more dangerous and practical secrets. Deciphering these messages today requires us to read these texts as their intended audience would have, with a mind open to symbolism, allegory, and multiple layers of meaning. It forces us to abandon our modern distinction between science and superstition, and to enter a world where a single illustration of a plant could simultaneously be an accurate botanical study, a spiritual emblem, a magical talisman, and a coded set of instructions for its use. These herbals were not naive or ignorant. They were sophisticated, multi-vocal documents that spoke in a whisper to the initiated while shouting harmless platitudes to the powerful. They remind us that in an age of censorship and fear, the most subversive knowledge often grows in the most beautiful and unexpected gardens, its roots hidden just beneath the surface. Imagine walking through the bustling agora of ancient Athens, the very heart of the world's first democracy. The air is thick with debate, the clatter of commerce, and the intense political maneuvering of citizens who held the power to shape their state's destiny. Now picture one of those citizens, a potter perhaps, taking a broken piece of his own work, a discarded shred of pottery called an ostracon, and carefully scratching a name onto its surface. This wasn't a shopping list or a personal note. This was a vote, and some of these votes carried hidden messages that were far more than just a name. They were weapons of mass political destruction, revealing the fierce, personal, and often hilarious underbelly of Athenian politics. This was the process of ostracism, a unique and brilliant democratic safety valve. Once a year, Athenian citizens were invited to take an ostracon and inscribe upon it the name of the individual they believed had become too powerful, too popular, or too dangerous for the good of the state. If a minimum of 6,000 votes were cast, the person whose name appeared most frequently would be banished from the city for 10 years. It wasn't a punishment for a crime, it was a preventative measure against tyranny. But the true hidden messages aren't in the outcome of these votes, they're in the words scribbled around the names on the pottery shards themselves. These casual add-ons transform simple ballots into a sprawling public comment section, a raw and unfiltered stream of political consciousness from over 2,000 years ago. Many of these ostraka are brutally direct in their personal attacks. One found near the Acropolis simply bears the name Themistocles, the legendary architect of the Greek victory over the Persians. But next to his name, a voter had scrawled the reason for his vote, for the Mede, accusing Themistocles of being a traitor in league with the Persians. This was the ancient equivalent of a modern political attack ad, a devastating and baseless accusation meant to undermine a towering figure through sheer insinuation. Another ostracon targeting a prominent citizen named Megacles doesn't just state his name, it adds a bitingly concise reason. Megacles, son of Hippocrates, is a reprobate. The insult is vague, personal, and utterly effective, a classic smear that required no evidence, only audacity. The creativity on display is astonishing. Some voters didn't just write, they drew. An ostracon aimed at a man named Aristides, nicknamed the Just for his famed fairness, features a crude but unmistakable caricature of his face, complete with a large comical nose. This was political cartooning at its most elemental, using humor and ridicule to cut a respected statesman down to size. The message hidden in this doodle is powerful. We are not in awe of you. We see you as a flawed, even ridiculous man. In a culture that valued public honor above all else, this kind of visual mockery could be more damaging than any written charge. Beyond the insults, these shards reveal a sophisticated understanding of political propaganda. The act of pre-writing names is a fascinating hidden message in itself. Archaeologists have found caches of ostraka, all in the same handwriting, all targeting the same individual. This suggests that political factions organized smear campaigns, preparing pre-written ballots for less literate citizens to simply deposit. This wasn't a spontaneous expression of outrage, it was a calculated strategy to manipulate the democratic process. The hidden message here is one of machine politics, showing that even in its purest form, democracy was vulnerable to organized lobbying and behind-the-scenes coordination by powerful interests. What makes these graffiti so compelling is their profoundly human scale. These are not the grand pronouncements carved into marble for eternity by the state. They are the quick, passionate, and often petty thoughts of individual voters preserved by pure chance. One voter, supporting the ostracism of a man named Calixenus, didn't just write the name. He added a full sentence explaining his reasoning. Calixenus, son of Aristonomus, is the one who proposed the decree. This is a specific, policy-based critique, a voter holding a politician accountable for a particular legislative action he disagreed with. It shows a deeply engaged electorate, citizens who are paying close attention and using their vote to send a clear message about the kind of leadership they would and would not tolerate. The ultimate hidden message of the Athenian ostraca is not in any single insult or cartoon. It is in the collective picture they paint of a democracy that was vibrant, messy, and fiercely protective of its liberties. The very existence of the ostracism process reveals a profound fear of concentrated power and an unwavering belief in the citizens' right to curtail it. The graffiti shows that this process was not a dry, administrative affair. It was a public spectacle, a cathartic release of political tension where every citizen, from the wealthy landowner to the humble artisan, had an equal voice and the freedom to use it as bluntly as they saw fit. These broken pieces of pottery are the tangible echoes of that voice, reminding us that democracy has always been a rough, noisy, and deeply human enterprise, where the most powerful messages are sometimes scratched in haste by an ordinary person holding a piece of rubble. Standing like silent, weathered sentinels across the misty landscapes of Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, the Ogham stones present a mystery carved in stone. Their messages are not hidden in complex illustrations or buried deep within tombs. They are displayed proudly on the edges of great monoliths, written in a script so deceptively simple it resembles a series of straight notches and lines. This is Ogham, often called the Celtic tree alphabet, and its stark, linear form is a masterclass in minimalism designed for one purpose: to be carved into the hard, resistant grain of stone. Each inscription is a permanent mark on the land itself, a voice from the early centuries of the Common Era that refuses to be silenced, declaring ownership, memory, and perhaps even a warning to those who could understand its coded language. At first glance, an Ogham inscription appears almost mathematical. It consists of a central vertical line, the stem line, with a series of short horizontal or diagonal lines crossing it. Each unique combination of these marks, whether they are on the left, right, or directly through the stem line, represents a letter from the ancient Irish alphabet. The script is named for the Irish god Ogma, a deity celebrated for his eloquence and strength, which perfectly encapsulates the power of these words made stone both forceful and eloquent in their permanence. The alphabet itself is divided into 4 groups of 5 letters, each group named for its first character, and many of those characters are indeed named after trees, like Beath for birch or Dure for oak. This deep connection to the natural world hints at a culture that saw its identity intertwined with the forest and the land, a symbolism encoded right into the very structure of its writing. The most common and straightforward purpose of these stones was to define territory. In a world without formal surveys or paper deeds, what better way to declare "I am here" than to etch your name and your father's name into a massive rock and plant it firmly in the soil? A typical inscription might read Maci Cori Bronos, which translates to "of Mac Caerthan, son of Bran." This was not a casual graffito, it was a legal statement, a Bronze Age no trespassing sign that carried the full weight of tribal law. It announced to all who passed that this land, from this stone to that river, belonged to this lineage. The stone was a witness, an immutable part of the landscape that testified to a claim that could be verified by the entire community. The hidden message was one of power and identity, a permanent anchor for a family's history in a specific place. But other stones served a more poignant function. They were memorials. These inscriptions often begin with the word "annum," meaning the name of, followed by the deceased individual. They are the ancient equivalent of a headstone, but placed not in a crowded cemetery but in the open landscape, perhaps along a well-trodden path where all travelers would see it and remember the person commemorated. The hidden message here is one of social standing and legacy. Erecting such a stone was an expensive and skilled undertaking, requiring the labor of a master carver. By doing so, a family was not only honoring their dead but also publicly displaying their wealth and status, ensuring that the reputation of the deceased, and by extension, their living relatives, would endure for generations, literally set in stone. The most tantalizing possibility, however, moves beyond the practical into the realm of the mystical. Some Ogham inscriptions are cryptic, consisting of just a single, repeated word or a seemingly nonsensical string of letters. Others are found in conjunction with ancient burial sites or in locations known for their spiritual significance in later Celtic folklore. Scholars like the renowned archaeologist R. A.S. McAllister proposed that these could be apotropaic marks carvings intended to ward off evil spirits or to protect a sacred space. The very act of enwriting a name or a powerful word in this ancient symbolic script may have been believed to harness a protective magic. The Ogham strokes themselves, so stark and deliberate, could have been seen as a form of spiritual fencing, creating a barrier against malevolent forces. In this light, the stone is not just a marker but a guardian, its hidden message a silent incantation for protection that has echoed through the centuries. Deciphering these stones is a challenge that blends linguistics, archaeology, and a touch of poetic intuition. The language is primitive Irish, a precursor to modern Irish, Scottish Gaelic, and Manx. The script's simplicity is its own kind of cipher. Without word spacing or punctuation, a string of notches must be carefully grouped and translated. Furthermore, many stones have been worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, their messages fading into the stone, becoming a literal part of the landscape they were meant to define. Modern technologies like reflectance transformation imaging allow researchers to highlight the faintest of marks, using angled light to make shadows dance in the ancient grooves, teasing out letters that have been invisible to the naked eye for 1,000 years. The true legacy of the Ogham stones lies in their powerful, physical connection to a world that left few written records. They are the earliest surviving source of written Irish, providing invaluable clues about the development of the language. But more than that, they are direct and powerful statements of identity from a people we know primarily through the writings of their enemies, like the Romans. They represent a defiant, indigenous voice that chose to write its history not on perishable vellum, but on the bones of the island itself. Each time we trace the notches of an Ogham inscription, we are not just reading a name. We are touching the same stone that a Celt touched 15 centuries ago, sharing in their desire to be remembered, to claim their place in the world, and to leave a message that would outlast them, waiting for the future to lean in and listen. From the celestial calculations of the Antikythera Mechanism to the knotted narratives of Andean quippers, our journey through 30 hidden messages reveals a truth that transcends time and culture. Humanity is and has always been a species of cryptographers. We are forever driven to embed our deepest truths just beneath the surface, to whisper our greatest secrets in codes only the initiated can hear. This universal impulse connects a medieval monk scraping away Archimedes' work to save parchment with a Minoan scribe pressing symbols into clay, and a Renaissance painter hiding political allegory in a mythological scene with a Viking carver boasting of his voyages in cipher runes. Each artifact, whether a grand monument or a humble pottery shard, is a testament to our perpetual desire to communicate on multiple levels, to protect knowledge, to challenge power, to express devotion, or simply to ensure that a part of us, our cleverness or our belief, endures. What unites these diverse methods, the linguistic, the symbolic, the mathematical, and the artistic, is a profound understanding that the most powerful messages are rarely the most obvious. They require effort to unlock. They demand that we lean in, that we question, that we change our perspective. The true meaning of the Nazca lines is only visible from a vantage point the creators themselves could never physically achieve, reminding us that understanding often requires us to see things from a new angle. The deepest secrets of an Egyptian tomb wall are not in the grand pronouncements of the pharaoh's divinity. but in the subtle puns and homophones woven into the hieroglyphs by a skeptical priest. This layered communication reflects the complex nature of human thought itself. Our inner worlds are not simple, and our methods of expressing them have never been confined to a single, plain-speaking dimension. This compulsion to encode speaks to our deepest fears and highest aspirations. We hide messages to safeguard sacred knowledge from profanation, as with the Nag Hammadi scriptures buried to survive persecution. We encrypt to protect ourselves from the wrath of tyrants, a practice seen in the dangerous political critiques hidden within Ottoman love poetry. We conceal to claim territory and assert identity, as the Ogham stones of Ireland so boldly declare. And sometimes we encode simply for the joy of the puzzle itself, for the intellectual satisfaction of creating a lock that only a worthy mind can pick, a game played out beautifully in the playful squiggles of Elgar's Dorabella cipher. In every case, the act of hiding is an act of hope, a belief that someone someday will be curious enough, diligent enough, and intelligent enough to find the key. So the next time you stand before a historical artifact in a museum, or examine a faded document, or even walk past an ancient stone in a field, I encourage you to look closer. Remember that what you see is often just the top layer, the public broadcast. Ask yourself what might be concealed in the pattern of a tapestry, the margin of a manuscript, or the arrangement of stones in a field. The greatest mysteries are not always lost in deep jungles or buried in secret tombs. They are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for a curious mind to ask the right question. The collective message from every culture we've explored is an invitation to become that person, to engage with history not as a passive observer, but as an active detective, understanding that every object from the past has a story to tell, and the most fascinating stories are rarely the